They said I was worthless, barren, a woman with no future, so my own father sold me for 50 gold coins to a stranger in the mountains. But what that town didn't know, what even I didn't know, was that the worst betrayal of my life would become my salvation. This is the story of how I went from being dragged through a blizzard in chains to standing in that same town square, pregnant and victorious, watching the lies that destroyed me burn to ash. Stay until the end to hear how one corrupt doctor's cruelty changed not just my life, but an entire frontier territory. And when you're done, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. Daratam. The rope burned. Clara Whitfield's wrists had gone numb an hour ago, but she could still feel the hemp fibers cutting through her skin every time the horse jolted forward. Blood had dried in thin lines across her palms. She didn't bother looking at the damage anymore. What was the point? 3 days ago, she'd been a daughter. 2 days ago, she'd been nothing. Today, she was cargo. The January wind screamed across the Montana territory like something alive and furious. Snow fell so thick Clara could barely see her father's back as he rode ahead, leading her like livestock toward a fate he'd sold her into without flinching. 50 gold coins. That's what she was worth. 50 coins, and the promise that he'd never have to look at her shameful face again. Clara's mother hadn't even said goodbye. She'd stood in the doorway of their small frontier home with her arms crossed and her mouth pressed into a thin, disgusted line. The same woman who'd braided Clara's hair every morning for 22 years had watched her only daughter get bound with rope and dragged into the wilderness without shedding a single tear. "You brought this on yourself," her mother had said. Clara still heard those words with every frozen breath. The town of Iron Hollow sat 3 hours behind them now, buried somewhere in the white chaos of the storm. Clara tried not to think about the people there, the shopkeepers who'd stopped serving her, the women who crossed the street when they saw her coming, the men who looked at her like she carried disease. All because of one man. Dr. Raymond Pritchard. The name alone made Clara's stomach twist. He was Iron Hollow's only physician, a man with silver hair and a voice that sounded like trust itself. When Clara had gone to him 6 months ago with concerns about irregular monthly cycles, he'd examined her with cold, clinical hands and delivered his verdict without hesitation. "You're barren, Miss Whitfield. Completely sterile. You'll never bear children." The words had hit like a gunshot. Clara had stumbled out of his office in a daze, barely hearing his instructions to inform any potential suitors of her condition immediately. It was the ethical thing to do, he'd said, the honorable thing. She'd been engaged at the time. Thomas Brennan, son of the wealthiest family in 3 counties, handsome, charming, and completely horrified when Clara tearfully confessed what the doctor had told her. He'd broken their engagement within the hour. His mother had made sure the entire town knew why by sunset. "That poor boy," people whispered. Imagine if he'd married her without knowing, what a curse that would have been. The scandal had spread like wildfire through winter kindling. Within days, Clara's reputation was destroyed. Men who'd once competed for her attention now avoided her completely. Mothers pulled their sons away when she walked past. Even the priest had given her pitying looks during Sunday service, as if her womb's supposed failure was somehow a moral failing. Her father had taken it the hardest. "I got 3 younger daughters who need good marriages," he'd growled one night, drunk and mean. "But who's going to court them when everyone knows their sister is defective? You've ruined this whole family, Clara. Ruined us." She tried to defend herself, tried to say that maybe the doctor was wrong, that maybe she should see another physician in a different town. But her father had backhanded her across the mouth and told her to stop making excuses. 2 weeks later, a man named Elias Boone had ridden into Iron Hollow. Clara had never seen him before. None of them had. He was tall and broad-shouldered, maybe 35, with dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes that looked like they'd forgotten how to trust anything. He wore a heavy coat streaked with old bloodstains and carried himself like someone who'd spent too many years alone. He'd gone straight to Clara's father with a proposition. "I heard you got a daughter nobody wants," he'd said, his voice rough and low. "I need a woman to help run my ranch through winter. I'll pay 50 gold coins, cash." Clara's father had barely hesitated. "She's damaged goods," he'd warned. "Can't have kids. You understand that?"
Elias Boone had shrugged. Don't need kids. Need help. That's all. The deal was made before Clara even knew it was happening.
Now here she was, bound and bleeding, being delivered like purchased cattle to a stranger who lived somewhere high in the mountains where decent people didn't go. Her father hadn't even bothered lying to her about what was happening. He'd just tied her wrists, hoisted her onto a horse, and started riding. Please, Clara had begged that morning, please don't do this. Her father hadn't looked back. Should have thought about that before you shamed us. The temperature kept dropping. Clara's dress, a thin cotton thing meant for indoor work, was completely inadequate for this weather. Ice had formed in her hair. Her feet, wrapped in boots 2 sizes too big, had lost all feeling. She was shivering so violently her teeth rattled. She was going to die out here, either from the cold or from whatever this Elias Boone planned to do with her once they reached his isolated cabin. Men didn't buy women in secret and drag them into the wilderness for honorable reasons. Clara knew that. Everyone knew that. But nobody in Iron Hollow had lifted a finger to stop it. The trail narrowed as they climbed higher. Pine trees pressed in from both sides, their branches heavy with snow. The wind howled through the gaps like wolves hunting. Clara's horse stumbled twice on hidden ice, nearly throwing her both times. With her hands bound, she couldn't catch herself. If she fell now, she'd probably break something. Not that it would matter. Her father finally stopped when they reached a clearing where 3 trails split in different directions. He dismounted with a grunt, his breath fogging in the frozen air. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually look at her, maybe say something, offer some last piece of fatherly concern before abandoning her completely. Instead, he just checked the knots on her wrists to make sure they were still tight. Elias's place is up the left trail, he said, speaking to the air rather than to her. About 2 more miles. He'll be waiting. Clara's voice came out hoarse. What if he kills me? Her father swung back onto his horse. Then I guess that's one less problem for me to worry about. He rode away without another word. Clara watched him disappear into the storm, her vision blurring with tears that froze on her cheeks the moment they fell. The rope around her wrists seemed to tighten. Her horse shifted nervously beneath her, clearly unhappy about being left alone in this weather. She was completely abandoned now. 22 years old, and her entire life had been reduced to this: a bound woman on a half-frozen horse, waiting for a stranger to claim his purchase. The left trail climbed steeply through dense forest. Clara's horse picked its way carefully over roots and rocks buried under snow. Every step sent jolts of pain through Clara's frozen body. She tried to stay upright, tried to maintain some shred of dignity, but exhaustion was winning. She'd barely slept in 3 days, barely eaten. The shame and fear had been eating her alive from the inside out. Maybe death would be a mercy. The thought came quietly, like a whisper in the back of her mind. If she just let herself slip off this horse, let the cold take her, then at least it would be over. No more humiliation, no more being treated like she was broken, no more watching people she'd known her whole life look at her with disgust. Clara closed her eyes. The horse kept walking. She didn't know how much time passed. Minutes blurred into each other. The storm seemed to be getting worse, the wind shrieking through the trees with renewed violence. Clara's entire body was numb now. She couldn't feel her hands anymore, couldn't feel her legs. She was just a frozen shell being carried forward by momentum and a horse that was probably lost. Then she saw the light. It was faint at first, just a distant orange glow cutting through the white chaos. But as the horse kept climbing, the glow grew brighter, warmer, real. A cabin. It sat in a small clearing carved out of the mountainside, surrounded by towering pines and half buried in snowdrifts. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, firelight flickered in the windows. It looked almost peaceful, like something out of a children's story. Clara's horse stopped at the edge of the clearing, refusing to go farther. The cabin door opened. A man stepped out into the storm. Elias Boone. He was even bigger than Clara remembered from that brief glimpse in Iron Hollow. Well over 6 feet, with shoulders that belonged on someone who spent their life breaking rocks. His face was hard and weathered, marked by old scars and new grief. He wore no coat despite the cold, just a worn wool shirt and canvas pants tucked into heavy boots. His eyes found Clara immediately. They were gray, cold, unreadable. He crossed the clearing in long strides, his boots crunching through the snow with purpose. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Whatever was going to happen would happen now, and she was too weak to fight back. Elias reached her horse and stopped. He looked up at her for a long moment, taking in her bound wrists, her frozen clothes, her bleeding hands. His jaw tightened. Something flickered across his face. Anger, maybe, or disgust, but it was gone too quickly for Clara to read. Then he spoke. "Did he tie you like this the whole ride up?" His voice was rougher than she remembered. Damaged somehow, like he'd spent too many years not using it. Clara tried to answer, but her throat was too frozen. All that came out was a croak. Elias swore under his breath. He pulled a knife from his belt, a wicked-looking thing with a curved blade. And Clara flinched hard, certain this was how it ended. Instead, he cut the rope. The bindings fell away from her wrists in a single smooth motion. Blood rushed back into her hands with 1,000 needles of pain. Clara gasped, nearly falling forward off the horse. Elias caught her before she hit the ground, his arms locking around her waist with surprising gentleness. "Easy," he said. "I got you." He lifted her down like she weighed nothing. Clara's legs buckled the moment her feet touched snow. She couldn't stand, couldn't hold herself up. 3 days of riding in the cold had destroyed whatever strength she had left. Elias didn't hesitate. He swept her up into his arms and carried her toward the cabin. Clara's mind was screaming at her to fight, to run, to do something other than let herself be carried into a stranger's house like a helpless child. But her body wouldn't cooperate. She was too cold, too broken. The cabin's warmth hit her like a physical blow. Heat poured from a massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Thick furs covered the floor. A simple wooden table sat near the fire, flanked by 2 handmade chairs. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with supplies and tools. Everything was clean and organized, almost obsessively so. Elias set Clara down in one of the chairs near the fire. Then he disappeared into a back room and returned with an armful of blankets. He wrapped them around her shoulders without a word, then knelt in front of the fireplace and added more wood to the flames. Clara sat there shivering violently, trying to process what was happening. He wasn't hurting her. He'd cut her free, carried her inside, given her warmth. This wasn't what she'd expected. Elias stood and moved to the shelves, pulling down a tin cup and a clay jug. He poured something dark into the cup and brought it to Clara. "Drink." She took the cup with shaking hands. The liquid inside smelled like herbs and honey. She sipped it cautiously. It was warm and sweet with a bite of something stronger underneath. Whiskey, probably. It burned going down, but it was the best thing Clara had tasted in days. Elias watched her drink, his expression unreadable. Then he crossed to the table and sat down in the other chair, putting distance between them. He didn't speak, just sat there with his hands folded on the table, waiting. Clara finished the drink and set the cup down carefully. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Why didn't you? She couldn't finish the sentence. Elias's jaw tightened again. "Your father told me you'd be coming willingly, said you agreed to work here for the winter in exchange for room and board." His eyes hardened. "He didn't mention he'd be delivering you tied up like livestock." Clara stared at him. "He lied to you?" "Yeah. I figured that out." Silence fell between them. Clara's mind was racing. If Elias thought she'd agreed to come here, then maybe he wasn't the monster she'd feared. Maybe he was just a lonely rancher who needed help and had been lied to as much as she had. Or maybe he was lying now. "What happens to me?" Clara asked quietly. Elias stood and moved to the shelves again, pulling down dried meat and bread. He set both on the table in front of her. "You eat, you warm up, you sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest." "That's it?" He looked at her with those cold gray eyes. "You want me to hurt you? Is that what you're expecting?" Clara flinched. "I don't know what to expect." "Then don't expect anything." Elias moved toward a door at the back of the cabin. "There's a bed through there. Take it. I'll sleep out here." He was giving her the bedroom. Clara watched him spread a bedroll near the fire. Her mind struggling to reconcile this man with the monster Iron Hollow had whispered about. The town had painted Elias Boone as a savage, a hermit who lived like an animal in the mountains, someone dangerous. But the man in front of her just seemed tired, broken in the same way Clara felt broken. She ate the food he'd given her in silence. The meat was tough but filling. The bread was homemade and actually good.
Her body slowly stopped shaking as warmth seeped into her frozen limbs. When she finished, Clara stood on unsteady legs. "Thank you." Elias didn't look up from where he was arranging his bedroll. "Don't thank me yet." "Why not?" "Because you're still stuck here until spring." His voice was flat. "Roads won't be passable for at least 2 months, maybe 3. You can't leave, even if you want to." The reality of her situation crashed down on Clara all over again. She was trapped, completely isolated in the mountains with a man she didn't know, surrounded by snow and wilderness that would kill her if she tried to run. She had no choices left. Elias seemed to read her thoughts. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. "And I'm not going to force you into anything, but you need to understand something." "What?" He finally looked at her. "Your father sold you. Whatever life you had in that town is gone. They threw you away like you were nothing. You can hate me for it if you want, but I'm not the one who did this to you." The words hit harder than any slap, because they were true. Clara felt tears burning in her eyes again, but she refused to let them fall. She'd cried enough, bled enough, broken enough. She walked to the bedroom door and paused. "What do you want from me?" Elias laid down on his bedroll and stared at the ceiling. "Same thing I told your father. Help running this place through winter. Cooking, cleaning, mending. Work. I can't do alone." He was quiet for a moment. "That's all. And when spring comes, then you can leave if you want. I'll take you wherever you want to go." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to think there was still some shred of decency left in the world, but Iron Hollow had beaten that hope out of her. She went into the bedroom and closed the door. The room was small but clean. A simple bed covered in furs sat against one wall. A wooden chest sat at its foot. A single window looked out over the dark forest. Clara collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, too exhausted to even remove her boots. She should have been terrified. She should have been planning escape routes and weapons and ways to survive. Instead, she just felt numb, empty, like something essential inside her had finally died during that frozen ride up the mountain. Clara closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. She woke to the smell of coffee. Sunlight was pouring through the window, bright and clean. The storm had passed. Clara sat up slowly, her entire body screaming with pain. Every muscle felt like it had been beaten with rocks. Her wrists were swollen and bruised where the rope had cut in. Her fingers were stiff and clumsy. But she was alive. The bedroom door was open. Through it, Clara could see Elias moving around the main room, building up the fire and setting a pot on to boil. He moved with practiced efficiency, like someone who'd done this same routine 1,000 times alone. Clara forced herself to stand. Her legs wobbled, but they held. She walked to the doorway and leaned against the frame, watching him. Elias glanced over his shoulder. "You look like hell." "Thanks." He almost smiled. "Almost." "Coffee's ready. Food will be soon." Clara crossed to the table and sat down. Her hands were shaking again, but not from cold this time. From exhaustion, from shock, from everything that had happened in the last 72 hours finally catching up to her. Elias poured coffee into 2 tin cups and set one in front of her. Then he went back to cooking what smelled like salt pork and eggs. Clara sipped the coffee carefully. It was strong and bitter, but it helped clear some of the fog from her mind. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked. 5 years. "Alone?" Elias's shoulders tensed. "Yeah." Clara wanted to ask why, but the pain in his voice told her not to push. Instead, she looked around the cabin with fresh eyes. Everything was meticulously maintained. No dust, no clutter. Even the firewood was stacked with military precision. This was a man trying to control something in a world that had taken all his control away. Clara recognized that impulse. She'd spent 6 months trying to control the narrative around her own shame, trying to make people see her as more than the doctor's diagnosis. It hadn't worked. The town had already decided what she was, and nothing she said or did could change their minds. Elias brought over 2 plates of food and sat down across from her. They ate in silence. The food was simple but good. Clara realized she hadn't had a real meal in days. She'd been too sick with anxiety to keep anything down back in Iron Hollow, but here, in this quiet cabin with a stranger who'd shown her more basic decency than her own family, she was suddenly starving. When they finished, Elias collected the plates and washed them in a basin near the fire. Clara watched him work.
trying to figure out what kind of man he actually was. He moved like someone used to violence, but currently practicing restraint, like a wolf that had decided not to bite. "I need to check on the cattle," Elias said eventually. "Storm probably scattered them. I'll be gone most of the day." Clara nodded. "What should I do?" "Whatever you want. Rest. Explore. Just don't go past the tree line. Easy to get lost out there, and I'm not in the mood to dig your frozen corpse out of a snowbank." The bluntness should have been shocking, but Clara almost laughed. It was the first honest thing anyone had said to her in months. Elias pulled on a heavy coat and gloves. He paused at the door. "There's a rifle above the fireplace if you need it. You know how to shoot?" "My father taught me." "Good. Wolves sometimes come close during winter. You see one. Don't hesitate." Then he was gone. Clara sat alone in the cabin, listening to the silence. It was the first time she'd been truly alone in days. No ropes, no guards, no one watching her with disgust or pity. Just quiet. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the world was blindingly white. Snow covered everything in thick blankets, transforming the mountain into something alien and beautiful. The sky was a sharp, crystalline blue. Trees stood like sentinels, their branches heavy with ice. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt almost peaceful. Clara spent the morning exploring the cabin. It wasn't large, just the main room with its fireplace and table, the small bedroom she'd slept in, and a storage room packed with supplies. Dried meat, flour, coffee, beans, salt, enough to survive months of isolation. Elias had clearly been planning to winter alone. Then her father had shown up with an offer too cheap to refuse. Clara wondered what 50 gold coins meant to a man who lived like this. Probably a fortune, enough to buy livestock or equipment or supplies for next season. Her father had sold her for practical resources, and Elias had bought her for practical help. Neither of them had seen her as a person. The realization should have hurt more than it did. But Clara was starting to understand something important. She was done letting other people define her worth. The town had called her barren and worthless. Her family had sold her like property. Fine, let them. She was still alive. And that had to be enough. Clara spent the afternoon cleaning. Not because Elias had asked her to, but because she needed something to do with her hands. She swept the floors, organized the shelves, washed the breakfast dishes properly. The work felt good, normal, like she was reclaiming some small piece of herself through simple tasks. When Elias returned at dusk, he stopped in the doorway and stared. "You didn't have to do this." Clara shrugged. "You said you needed help. I'm helping." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then he nodded and started removing his coat. "Cattle are fine. Lost 2 calves to the storm, but the rest made it. I'm sorry. Part of ranching." Elias moved to the fire and warmed his hands. "Nature doesn't give a damn about your plans." They fell into an uneasy routine after that. Elias would leave early to tend the cattle, check fences, hunt, or haul firewood. Clara would stay at the cabin, cooking meals, mending clothes, keeping the fire going. They'd eat dinner together in near silence. Then Elias would sleep by the fire while Clara took the bedroom. They barely spoke beyond practical necessities. But Clara noticed things. She noticed that Elias always made sure there was hot coffee waiting when she woke up, that he brought back fresh game and showed her how to prepare it properly, that he never entered the bedroom without knocking first, even though it was technically his cabin. Small gestures of respect that Clara hadn't realized she'd been starving for. A week passed, then 2. The mountains remained locked in winter's grip. Snow fell almost daily, piling higher and higher until the cabin windows were half buried. The cold was relentless, the kind of brutal freeze that killed anything caught outside unprepared. But inside the cabin, Clara felt something unexpected. Safety. Not comfort exactly. Not happiness. But a basic sense of security she hadn't felt since before the doctor's diagnosis destroyed her life. Elias never threatened her, never touched her without permission, never looked at her with the disgust or pity she'd grown used to in Iron Hollow. He treated her like a person doing a job, nothing more and nothing less. It shouldn't have been revolutionary, but after months of being treated like contaminated goods, even basic human decency felt like a miracle. One night, about 3 weeks into her stay, Clara worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her. They were eating dinner. venison stew with vegetables from Elias's root cellar. The fire crackled between them. Outside, wind howled through the trees.
"Why did you really buy me?" Claire asked quietly.
Elias's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly. "I told you. I needed help. You could have hired someone from town, someone who came willingly. Town people don't come up here. Why not?" His jaw tightened. "Because they think I'm dangerous." "Are you?" Elias looked at her directly for the first time in days. "I used to be." The honesty in his voice made Clara's breath catch. This wasn't a man lying to make himself look better. This was someone who'd accepted exactly what he was and stopped caring what anyone thought about it. "What happened to you?" Clara asked. Elias was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice rough with old pain. "I had a wife, Sarah, and a son, Jacob. He was 6 months old." Elias stared into the fire. "We were living in a settlement 2 territories over. Good land, good people. I thought we were building something that would last." Clara's heart was already sinking. "Raiders came through one night, burned half the settlement, killed anyone who fought back." His hands clenched into fists on the table. "I was out checking traps. By the time I got back, they were both gone." The cabin felt impossibly quiet. "I hunted those men for 2 years," Elias continued. "Found every single one of them. Made sure they understood exactly what they'd taken from me before they died." He looked at Clara. "That's why people think I'm dangerous. Because I am. Or at least, I was." Clara didn't know what to say. Elias stood and moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. "After it was done, I came here. Built this cabin. Tried to forget. But you can't forget something like that. It follows you." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "Don't be. I made my choices." He turned back to her. "Your turn. Why did that town really throw you away?" Clara's throat tightened. She'd been avoiding this conversation, afraid that speaking the truth out loud would somehow make it more real. But Elias had been honest with her. She owed him the same. "The doctor said I was barren," she said quietly. "Told me I'd never have children. I was engaged at the time. Thomas broke it off the same day, and his family made sure everyone knew why. After that," she shrugged helplessly, "I was worthless. Nobody wanted a woman who couldn't give them a family." Elias's expression darkened. "And you believed him? This doctor? He was the only physician in town. Why would he lie?" "Because people lie all the time, especially when it benefits them." Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "I mean, that diagnosis was awful convenient for your ex-fiancé's family. Gave them a perfect excuse to break the engagement without looking like the villains." The words hit Clara like ice water. She'd never thought about it that way. Never questioned whether the doctor might have been influenced by the Brennan family's wealth and power. She'd just accepted his verdict as medical fact and let it destroy her life. But what if Elias was right? What if the whole thing had been a lie? Clara's hands started shaking. "I need air." She stood and walked to the door, ignoring Elias's warning about the cold. She stepped outside into the frozen night, barely feeling the temperature drop. Her mind was spinning. If the diagnosis was false, then everything that had happened was based on a lie. The humiliation, the rejection, her family selling her like livestock, all of it built on one man's word. Elias appeared in the doorway behind her, holding out her coat. "You'll freeze." Clara took it mechanically and wrapped it around her shoulders. "What if you're right? Then you got screwed over by people who didn't deserve you in the first place." She laughed, but it came out broken. "That doesn't make it hurt less." "No, but it means you're not what they said you were. Means you got a chance at a different life if you're willing to take it." Clara turned to look at him. Snow was falling again, soft and silent. Elias stood in the doorway with firelight behind him, his face half in shadow. He looked like something out of a ghost story. A man haunted by his past, but still standing. "What kind of life?" Clara asked. "The kind where you stop letting other people decide your worth." They stood there in the cold for a long moment. Then Clara went back inside. That night marked a shift. The silence between them became less hostile and more comfortable. They started talking during meals. Small things at first, then deeper conversations. Elias told her about learning to ranch from his father. Clara told him about growing up in Iron Hollow, back when it still felt like home. They discovered they were both readers. Elias had a small collection of books he had accumulated over the years, mostly practical guides and farming manuals, but also a worn copy of poetry and a few novels. Clara had always loved reading, but had been forced to give it up when her reputation collapsed. The town library had made it clear she wasn't welcome anymore. Now she could read again. They'd sit by the fire in the evenings, sharing books and occasionally reading passages aloud. Elias's voice was rough but steady, turning poetry into something real and grounded. Clara found herself looking forward to those quiet hours more than anything else in her day. Slowly, carefully, something like friendship began to form. But underneath it all, Clara felt something else growing. Something she didn't have a name for yet, something that terrified her. Because Elias Boone was nothing like the men in Iron Hollow. He didn't need her to be perfect or fertile or socially acceptable. He just needed her to be present, to pull her weight, to exist alongside him without demanding more than he could give. And somehow, that was enough. One morning, Clara woke to find fresh snow had blocked the cabin door completely. They had to dig their way out through a window. Elias worked with grim determination, carving a tunnel through snow that came up to his chest. Clara helped from inside, hauling away the snow he pushed back. It took 3 hours. When they finally cleared enough space to open the door, they stood in the entrance, panting and exhausted. The world outside was buried under at least 4 feet of fresh powder. The sky was already gray with the promise of more. "This is going to be a hard winter," Elias said quietly. Clara looked at the transformed landscape. "How much food do we have?" "Enough. If we're careful." They were trapped now, truly isolated. Even if the roads had been passable before, they definitely weren't anymore. There would be no leaving until spring, no rescue, no escape. Just the two of them and whatever they could survive together. That night, a blizzard hit with savage force. Wind screamed around the cabin like something alive and furious. Snow fell so thick it was impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. The temperature plummeted. Elias piled extra wood on the fire and sealed every gap in the walls with rags and mud to keep the heat in. Clara had never experienced weather like this. It felt apocalyptic, like the world was ending just outside their door. "Will the cabin hold?" she asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. Elias checked the walls methodically. "Built it myself, it'll hold." But even he looked worried. The storm lasted 3 days. They stayed inside, keeping the fire burning and rationing their supplies. The cabin creaked and groaned under the assault. Snow piled against the walls until they were completely buried. The only light came from the fire and a single oil lamp. Elias barely slept. He kept watch through the nights, making sure the fire didn't die, checking for leaks or structural damage. Clara watched him wear himself down, trying to keep them both alive. On the 3rd night, she woke to find him slumped in his chair by the fire, finally unconscious from exhaustion. Clara got up quietly and added wood to the flames. Then she wrapped a blanket around Elias's shoulders and sat down in the other chair to keep watch herself. It was the least she could do. When Elias woke a few hours later, he found Clara still awake, still watching. He looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you," he said quietly. Clara nodded. They didn't need to say anything else. When the storm finally broke, they dug out again to find a world completely transformed. Snow had drifted as high as the roof in some places. Trees had fallen under the weight. The silence was absolute and eerie. "The cattle," Elias said. They were his only real source of income. If the herd had been wiped out, he'd have nothing to sell come spring. Elias suited up immediately and headed out into the deep snow. Clara called after him. "I'm coming with you." "It's dangerous." "So is being alone out there if something happens." He looked like he wanted to argue. Then he nodded. Clara put on every layer she owned and followed Elias into the white wilderness. The snow came up to her thighs in places, making every step exhausting. But she pushed forward, determined to help. They found the cattle huddled in a small valley, sheltered by a rock outcropping. Most had survived, though several were injured. One young cow was trapped under a fallen tree, struggling weakly. Elias immediately started digging around her while Clara checked the rest of the herd. The work was brutal. Clara's hands went numb despite her gloves. Her legs screamed with exhaustion. But she kept going, because Elias needed her. They worked together for hours, freeing the trapped cow and moving the herd to safer ground. By the time they finished, the sun was setting and they were both completely spent. The walk back to the cabin felt like it took days. When they finally stumbled through the door, they collapsed near the fire in a heap. Neither of them had the energy to move. Clara's entire body was shaking with exhaustion, but they'd done it. They'd saved the herd together. Elias looked at her across the firelight. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." "Why?" Clara met his eyes. "Because you didn't have to cut me free that first night, but you did anyway." Something shifted in Elias's expression, something that made Clara's heart beat faster. They sat there in the firelight, covered in snow and exhaustion, and Clara realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that she didn't want to leave when spring came. She didn't want to go back to Iron Hollow or anywhere else. She wanted to stay here. With him. The thought should have been absurd. She barely knew this man. They'd only spent a few weeks together. He was damaged and dangerous and haunted by ghosts she couldn't even imagine. But none of that mattered, because for the first time in 6 months, Clara felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Even if it was in the middle of nowhere, buried in snow, with a man the world had forgotten. She was home. The realization didn't come with fanfare or dramatic revelation. It settled into Clara's bones slowly over the following weeks, quiet and undeniable as the snow that kept falling outside. She was in love with Elias Boone. The thought terrified her more than anything Iron Hollow had ever done. Love meant vulnerability. It meant giving someone the power to destroy you. Clara had already been destroyed once by people she'd trusted. Her family, her fiancé, the doctor who'd lied. She'd promised herself she wouldn't be that stupid again. But Elias wasn't like them. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. Didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. Every morning he woke up and did the brutal work of survival without complaint. Every evening he came back to the cabin and treated Clara like she mattered. Not because she was useful, not because she owed him anything, just because. February arrived with temperatures so cold that water froze solid within minutes of leaving the fire. Elias had to break ice off the water barrel every morning with an axe. The cattle huddled together for warmth, their breath creating clouds of fog that hung in the air like ghosts. Clara learned to work beside Elias without needing words. She'd watch which tools he reached for and have them ready before he asked. He'd glance at the woodpile, and she'd already be restocking it. They moved around each other like dancers who'd practiced the same routine for years instead of weeks. The silence between them had become something precious. One morning, Clara woke to find Elias already gone. That wasn't unusual. He often left before dawn to check the herd. But when noon came and he still hadn't returned, Clara felt the first prickle of worry. By mid-afternoon, that worry had turned to fear. She stood at the window, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The sky was getting darker. Another storm was coming. If Elias was hurt out there somewhere, if he'd fallen or gotten trapped, he could freeze to death before she even knew where to look. Clara grabbed the rifle from above the fireplace. She'd never fired it, but she remembered her father's lessons from childhood. Point, breathe, squeeze. Simple enough in theory. She had no idea if she could actually shoot something living, but right now she was more worried about finding Elias than defending herself from wolves. She bundled up in every warm thing she owned and headed out. The cold hit her like a physical blow. Clara's breath froze in her lungs. Her eyes watered immediately, tears turning to ice on her cheeks. But she pushed forward, following the packed trail Elias had made that morning. The cattle were where they were supposed to be, huddled in their sheltered valley. But Elias wasn't with them. Clara's heart hammered. She scanned the area, looking for tracks, for signs of struggle, for anything that might tell her what happened. Then she saw it. A second set of tracks leading away from the herd, heading deeper into the forest. Elias had gone after something. Clara followed the tracks through snow that came up to her knees. Her legs burned with exhaustion within minutes, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The storm was getting closer. She could feel it in the air, that electric tension that came before the sky opened up. She found him 20 minutes later. Elias was crouched beside a massive pine tree, his rifle across his knees, staring at something Clara couldn't see. When he heard her approach, he spun around with the rifle raised, then lowered it immediately. "What the hell are you doing out here?" His voice was rough with anger. "Looking for you. You've been gone for hours." "I'm fine."
You don't look fine. Elias's jaw tightened. He gestured toward the tree. Wolfpack took down one of the calves. I tracked them here. They're denned up about 50 yards that way, and there's at least 6 of them. Clara felt ice settle in her stomach. That's too many. I know. So what are you doing? Trying to figure out if I can scare them off without getting killed.
The bluntness should have shocked her, but Clara was getting used to Elias's way of speaking. No sugarcoating, no false comfort, just the truth, brutal and direct. The storm's coming, Clara said. We need to go. If I leave now, they'll come back for the rest of the herd tonight. Then we'll deal with it tonight, together. Clara met his eyes. But I'm not leaving you out here alone. Something flickered across Elias's face. Surprise, maybe, or something softer. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but we move fast. They made it back to the cabin just as the first flakes started falling. Elias immediately began preparing defenses. He loaded both rifles, set out ammunition, built up the fire until it roared. Clara helped without being asked, understanding what he was planning without needing explanation. They were going to defend the herd. You ever killed anything before? Elias asked as he checked the rifle mechanisms. Clara thought about lying, then decided against it. No. It's not easy, even when you have to do it. I know. He looked at her. You sure you want to be part of this? Clara took one of the rifles and felt its weight in her hands. Those wolves kill the herd, you lose everything. So yeah, I'm sure. Elias almost smiled. You're tougher than you look. Had to be. They ate a quick meal as the storm built outside. The wind was already howling, snow falling in thick sheets. Visibility would be near zero once full dark hit. If the wolves came tonight, they'd have every advantage. Elias laid out the plan. We take turns watching from the window, see movement. We fire warning shots first. They don't scare, we aim to kill. Wolves are smart. They'll figure out pretty quick if we're serious. And if they're not scared, then we kill as many as we have to until they leave. Clara nodded, her mouth dry. They waited. The storm raged. Hours passed in tense silence. Clara and Elias traded watch shifts, one sleeping while the other kept vigil. The darkness outside was absolute, broken only by occasional flashes of lightning that illuminated the swirling snow. Around midnight, Clara saw them, shadows moving at the edge of the tree line, too big to be anything but wolves. She counted at least 4, maybe more lurking in the darkness beyond. Elias, she whispered. He was beside her instantly, rifle already in hand. He looked where she was pointing and swore under his breath. They're testing us, seeing if we're awake. What do we do? Show them we are? Elias opened the window just wide enough to aim through and fired a shot into the air. The crack of the rifle was deafening in the small cabin. The shadows scattered immediately, disappearing back into the forest. But they didn't leave. Clara could feel them out there, circling, waiting. The herd was vulnerable in the valley, and the wolves knew it. They'd keep coming back until they got what they wanted or decided the cost was too high. Get some sleep, Elias said. I'll keep watch. No. We do this together. He looked like he wanted to argue, then just nodded. They sat by the window together, rifles ready, waiting for the next attack. It came an hour later. This time the wolves moved faster, more coordinated. They split into 2 groups, one trying to draw attention while the other circled toward the cattle. Elias saw the tactic immediately. They're hunting us like prey, he said grimly. Smart bastards. He fired twice at the flanking group. Clara heard a yelp. He'd hit something. The wolves retreated again, but this time she could hear them howling to each other in the darkness, planning their next move. How many bullets do we have? Clara asked. Enough. Hopefully. They waited through another hour of tense silence. Clara's hands were shaking, whether from fear or exhaustion, she couldn't tell. Beside her, Elias remained perfectly still, his eyes scanning the darkness with practiced intensity. When the wolves came the 3rd time, they came hard. The entire pack rushed the valley at once, going straight for the cattle. The herd panicked, scattering in all directions. Elias was firing before Clara even registered what was happening, his shots precise and deadly. Shoot the one on the left, he shouted. Clara raised her rifle with trembling hands. She found the wolf in her sights. A massive gray shape moving through the snow. Her finger hesitated on the trigger. Clara, now! She fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder hard enough to bruise. The wolf yelped and went down, thrashing in the snow. Clara felt her stomach twist with nausea, but there was no time to process what she'd done. Elias was still firing, driving the pack back. 2 wolves lay dead in the snow. A third was limping badly. The rest finally seemed to understand that the cost wasn't worth the meal. They melted back into the forest and didn't return. Clara and Elias stayed at the window until dawn, making sure the wolves were really gone. When pale light finally started filtering through the storm, they went outside to assess the damage. 3 dead wolves lay in the snow. The cattle had scattered but were mostly unharmed. One calf had a nasty bite on its flank, but it would survive. They'd won. Clara stared at the wolf she'd killed. It was smaller than she'd thought, probably young. She felt sick. "First time's always hard," Elias said quietly beside her. "Does it get easier?" "No, but you learn to live with it." They dragged the wolf carcasses far from the cabin and left them for scavengers. Then they spent the rest of the morning calming the herd and treating the injured calf. By the time they made it back inside, they were both exhausted and covered in blood. Elias immediately moved to build up the fire. Clara collapsed into a chair, her hands still shaking. The rifle sat on the table in front of her, and she couldn't stop staring at it. "You did good," Elias said. "I killed something." "You protected something. There's a difference." Clara looked up at him. "Is there?"
Elias was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, there is. What you did tonight. That was survival. Not cruelty, not revenge, just doing what needed doing to keep something alive." He sat down across from her. "You think I wanted to kill those wolves? They're just trying to survive same as us. But it was them or the herd, and I chose what mattered more." "How do you live with that?" "By remembering why I did it." They sat in silence as the fire warmed the cabin. Outside, the storm was finally easing. Gray morning light filtered through the windows, making everything look washed out and surreal. Clara felt something shift inside her. She'd crossed a line tonight, done something she couldn't undo, taken a life even if it was just an animal. The old Clara from Iron Hollow would have been horrified, would have seen it as proof that she was becoming something monstrous. But the new Clara, the one who'd survived being sold and dragged through a blizzard and learned to live in the wilderness, she understood that sometimes you had to break yourself to become something stronger. "Thank you," she said quietly. Elias looked confused. "For what?" "For not making me feel weak for being upset about it." His expression softened. "You're not weak, Clara. Weak people don't ride into a storm looking for someone, don't stand watch all night defending livestock that isn't even theirs. Don't pull the trigger when it matters." He paused. "You're the furthest thing from weak I've ever seen." The words hit Clara harder than any bullet, because Elias meant them. She could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. This wasn't empty flattery or polite lies. This was truth from a man who didn't waste words on anything less. Clara felt tears burning in her eyes, but this time she didn't fight them. She let them fall, too tired to maintain the walls she'd built around herself. Elias stood and moved to her side. For a moment she thought he might try to comfort her, put a hand on her shoulder, or offer some awkward reassurance. Instead, he just stood there, a solid presence beside her, letting her cry without judgment. When the tears finally stopped, Clara felt emptied out. Hollow but clean, like something rotten had finally been purged. "I'm going to sleep," she said, her voice hoarse. Elias nodded. "I'll keep watch. Make sure those wolves don't come back." "You need sleep too." "I'll sleep later. Go." Clara wanted to argue, but didn't have the energy. She went to the bedroom and collapsed onto the furs without even removing her boots. Sleep claimed her instantly, pulling her down into darkness so complete it felt like drowning. She dreamed about Iron Hollow. In the dream, she was standing in the town square while everyone she'd ever known pointed and whispered. The doctor was there, smiling that professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thomas Brennan stood beside his mother, both of them looking at Clara like she was something disgusting they'd found on their shoes. But when Clara looked down at herself, she was wearing her blood-stained clothes from the wolf attack. She was holding the rifle. And when the townspeople started moving toward her with ropes and chains, she raised the weapon and they all stopped. She woke with a gasp. Daylight was streaming through the window. Clara sat up, disoriented and shaking. The dream had felt so real she could still smell the smoke from Iron Hollow's chimneys. still hear the whispers following her everywhere. She got up and went to the main room. Elias was asleep in his chair by the fire, his rifle across his lap. He looked exhausted, even in sleep, his face drawn and pale. Clara realized he'd probably stayed awake the entire time she'd been sleeping, keeping watch like he'd promised. She covered him with a blanket and started making coffee. The routine tasks helped ground her. Grinding beans, heating water, measuring out portions with careful precision. By the time the coffee was ready, Elias was stirring. He opened his eyes and looked at her. "You should have woken me." "You needed the sleep. So did you. I got plenty." They drank coffee in comfortable silence. Outside, the storm had passed completely, leaving the world buried under fresh snow that glittered in the sunlight. It would have been beautiful if it wasn't so deadly. "How's the herd?" Clara asked. "I checked on them an hour ago. They're fine. Spooked, but fine." "You went out while I was sleeping?" Elias shrugged. "Couldn't sleep anyway." Clara wanted to scold him for not resting, but she understood the impulse. Sometimes your mind wouldn't let you stop, wouldn't give you permission to relax, even when your body was screaming for it. They spent the day doing normal work. Elias chopped firewood while Clara mended clothes and prepared meals. The wolf attack hung between them like smoke, acknowledged but not discussed. They'd survived it. That was enough. But that evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Elias broke the silence. "You saved my life last night." Clara looked up from the sock she was darning. "What?" "When you came looking for me in the storm. If you hadn't found me when you did, I might have stayed out there too long, gotten caught in the worst of it." He stared into the fire. "I was being stubborn, stupid. You stopped me from making a fatal mistake. You would have done the same for me." "Yeah, I would have." He looked at her. "But that's not the same as actually doing it." Clara set down her mending. "Elias, we're stuck up here together until spring. Of course we're going to look out for each other. That's just survival." "Is that all it is?" The question hung in the air between them. Clara's heart was pounding. She knew what he was really asking, could feel it in the weight of his gaze, the tension in his shoulders. This was a moment that would change everything, and they both knew it. "No," she said quietly. "It's not." Elias stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "I told myself I wouldn't do this, wouldn't let myself feel anything for anyone ever again." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "After Sarah and Jacob died, I spent 2 years hunting the men who killed them. 2 years living on rage and nothing else. When it was over and they were all dead, I felt empty. Like I'd used up everything human inside me, and all that was left was this hollow thing shaped like a man." Clara stood but didn't move toward him. "You're not hollow." "How do you know?" "Because hollow men don't cut women free from ropes. Don't share their food and fire with strangers. Don't stay up all night protecting cattle that wouldn't even miss one calf." She took a step closer. "You're hurt, Elias. Damaged, haunted. But you're not hollow." He turned to face her. The firelight cast shadows across his scarred face, making him look both dangerous and heartbreakingly vulnerable. "What if I can't give you what you deserve? What if all I know how to do anymore is survive?" "Then we'll survive together. That's more than I had back in Iron Hollow." Clara, stop. She closed the distance between them. "Stop trying to protect me from yourself. I'm not some delicate thing that needs sheltering. I'm a woman who got called barren and worthless, who got sold by her own father, who killed a wolf with her bare hands shaking. You want to know what I deserve? I deserve someone who sees me as more than a diagnosis. Someone who treats me like I matter. And you've given me that every single day since you cut me free." Elias was staring at her like she'd just said something in a language he didn't understand. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do. I'm not a good man. I don't want a good man. I want you." The words came out raw and honest, stripping away every defense Clara had left. She stood there exposed, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, waiting for Elias to reject her. Instead, he reached out and cupped her face with one rough hand. His touch was gentle despite the calluses, careful despite the violence Clara knew those hands were capable of. He looked at her like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure." Elias kissed her. It wasn't smooth or practiced. It was clumsy and hesitant, the kiss of two people who'd forgotten how to be tender. But it was real, honest, raw. When they broke apart, Clara was shaking. Elias rested his forehead against hers. I can't promise you an easy life. I don't want easy. I want real. What if you regret this when spring comes? What if you wake up and realize you only stayed because you had no choice? Clara pulled back to look him in the eyes. Then that's my choice to make. Not yours. Not anyone else's. Mine. Something in Elias's expression broke open. He pulled her close, holding her against his chest like she was the only solid thing in a world made of smoke. Clara wrapped her arms around him and held on just as tight, feeling his heart hammering against her cheek. They stood there by the fire, two broken people holding each other together, while outside the mountain wind sang through the frozen trees. That night, Elias didn't sleep by the fire. They lay together in the small bedroom, fully clothed and careful, just learning the shape of being close to another person again. Elias's breathing was unsteady at first, like he'd forgotten how to relax. But gradually, he softened, his arms loose around Clara's waist. Tell me something true, Clara whispered into the darkness. Like what? Something nobody else knows. Elias was quiet for so long, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I was relieved when your father tied you up. Clara stiffened. What? When I saw you bound like that, hurt and scared, I felt relieved, because it meant you weren't coming willingly. Meant you didn't want to be here. He paused. I didn't want to be the kind of man who buys willing women, but someone who helps an unwilling one escape a bad situation that I could live with. Clara processed this. So you were trying to save me? More like I was trying to save myself from being a complete monster. You're not a monster, Elias. I've done monstrous things. So have I. I wish death on everyone in Iron Hollow. Every single person who turned their back on me, I wanted them to suffer. She turned to face him in the darkness. Does that make me a monster? No, makes you human. Then give yourself the same grace. Elias's hand found hers in the dark, their fingers tangling together. Your turn. Tell me something true. Clara thought about what to say. There were so many truths she'd been holding inside, so many secrets she'd never trusted anyone with. Finally, she chose the one that felt most dangerous. I don't think the doctor was wrong by accident, she said quietly. I think someone paid him to say I was barren. I think Thomas's family wanted out of the engagement and they made it happen. You got proof? No. Just a feeling. Clara stared at the dark ceiling. The Brennans are the richest family in 3 counties. Thomas could have married anyone, but his mother pushed hard for our engagement because my father owns valuable land. Then suddenly the doctor makes a diagnosis that conveniently destroys my reputation and gives them a perfect excuse to break things off without looking bad. So they got what they wanted without giving up anything. And I lost everything. Elias's grip tightened on her hand. You ever think about going back, proving them wrong? Every single day. Clara felt anger rising in her chest. But what would I prove? That the doctor lied? Nobody would believe me. They'd just say I was bitter and delusional. What if you could prove it? How? Elias was quiet for a moment. By having a child. The words hit Clara like ice water. She'd been so focused on surviving, on getting through each day in the mountains, that she'd almost forgotten about the diagnosis that destroyed her life. Almost convinced herself it didn't matter anymore. But Elias was right. A child would be irrefutable proof that the doctor had lied. That's assuming I even can, Clara said, her throat tight. What if he was actually right? What if I really am barren? Then we deal with it, together. You say that now, but... Clara. Elias turned onto his side to face her properly. I already lost one family. If I never have another child, I'll survive. What I won't survive is losing you because you're too afraid to find out the truth. I'm not afraid. Yes, you are. And that's okay. But don't let fear make your decisions for you. Clara felt tears burning in her eyes again. What if we try and nothing happens? What if months go by and I'm still not pregnant? At what point do we accept that Iron Hollow was right about me? Never. Because whether you can have children or not doesn't define your worth. It never did. Elias's voice was fierce. You hear me? You're not worthless.
You're not broken. You're not a failure. You're Clara Whitfield, the woman who survived being sold into slavery and came out the other side stronger." The tears spilled over. Elias pulled her close, letting her cry against his chest while he stroked her hair with those rough, gentle hands. Clara cried for everything she'd lost, everything she'd been told she couldn't have, every moment of shame and humiliation that had brought her to this frozen mountain. And when the tears finally stopped, she felt lighter. Not healed exactly, but like maybe healing was possible. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Elias went completely still. "What?" "I love you. I've been trying not to because it seems stupid to fall in love with someone I've only known a few weeks. But I can't help it." Clara pulled back to look at him. "You're the first person who's treated me like a human being in 6 months. The first person who didn't see me as damaged goods. And I love you for that." Elias's eyes were bright in the darkness. "I don't deserve—" "Stop. Just stop." Clara put her hand over his mouth. "I don't care what you think you deserve. I'm telling you what I feel. You don't have to say it back. You don't have to feel the same way. But you're going to let me say it without trying to convince me I'm wrong." Elias gently moved her hand away from his mouth. "I loved Sarah. With everything I had. When she died, I thought that was it. Thought I'd used up my one chance at love and the rest of my life would just be existing." Clara's heart sank. "Elias, let me finish." He cupped her face in his hands. "Then you showed up, broken and angry and refusing to quit. And somewhere between cutting you free and watching you shoot that wolf, I started feeling things I thought were dead." His thumb brushed across her cheek. "I don't know if what I feel is love yet. It's too new, too raw. But it's something, and it's growing, and that scares the hell out of me." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I couldn't protect Sarah. Couldn't save her or our son. What if I can't protect you either? What if I fail again?" "Then you fail. And we figure it out together." Clara kissed him softly. "You don't have to be my savior, Elias. You just have to be here." They fell asleep tangled together, sharing warmth and breath and the tentative hope that maybe, somehow, they could build something real from the wreckage of their pasts. The next few weeks passed in a blur of quiet domesticity. They worked together during the days and slept together at night, slowly learning each other's rhythms and habits. Elias taught Clara how to track animals and read weather patterns. Clara taught Elias how to cook something more complex than boiled meat. They talked about everything and nothing, shared stories from their different lives, laughed at stupid things, argued about trivial details just for the pleasure of making up afterward. It felt almost normal, almost like a real marriage instead of an arrangement born from desperation. One morning in early March, Clara woke feeling strange. Her stomach was unsettled, queasy in a way that had nothing to do with what she'd eaten. She dismissed it at first, thinking maybe she'd caught a cold or eaten something that disagreed with her. But when the same nausea returned the next morning and the morning after that, Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. She started paying attention to other things. Her monthly bleeding was late. Her breasts were tender. She was exhausted all the time, despite sleeping well. 3 weeks after she and Elias first shared a bed, Clara stood in the cabin alone while Elias was out checking the herd, and let herself acknowledge what her body had been trying to tell her. She was pregnant. The doctor had been wrong. Clara sank into a chair, her hands shaking. This was impossible. This was everything she'd been told couldn't happen. This was proof that Iron Hollow had destroyed her life based on a lie. She didn't know whether to laugh or scream or cry, so she did all three. When Elias came back an hour later, Clara was still sitting in the same chair, staring at nothing. The tears had dried on her face, leaving salt tracks down her cheeks. Her hands were pressed flat against her stomach, feeling for something she couldn't possibly detect yet. He knew immediately something was wrong. "Clara?" He dropped the firewood he'd been carrying and crossed to her in 3 strides. "What happened? Are you hurt?" She looked up at him, and the expression on her face made him freeze. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Elias stared at her, his face going through a series of expressions too quick to read. Shock. Disbelief. Something that might have been fear. Then, slowly, carefully, hope. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor. All the signs are there, the nausea, the exhaustion. My monthly's late.
Claire's voice cracked. He lied, Elias. That doctor looked me in the eyes and told me I was barren, and he lied. Elias sank to his knees in front of her chair. His hands hovered over her stomach like he was afraid to touch her, afraid this was some dream that would shatter if he moved too quickly. How long? 3 weeks, maybe 4. I can't be certain. And how are you feeling about this? Clara let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. I don't know. I'm terrified. I'm angry. I'm relieved. I'm so many things at once I can't even separate them. She grabbed his hands and pressed them against her stomach. There's a baby growing inside me. Proof that everything they said about me was wrong. But I don't know if I'm ready for this. Don't know if I can do this. You're the strongest person I've ever met. If anyone can do this, you can. That's not the same as wanting to. Elias pulled back slightly. Do you not want this? Clara closed her eyes. It was a fair question and one she'd been wrestling with since the moment she'd understood what was happening. Did she want a baby? Or did she just want the vindication of proving Iron Hollow wrong? I don't know, she admitted. A month ago, I would have killed for this, would have done anything to prove the doctor was lying. But now, she opened her eyes and looked at Elias. Now I'm scared that the only reason I want this baby is revenge, that I'm using an innocent life to settle a score. Or maybe you want this baby because it's ours, mine and yours. Something we made together that has nothing to do with that town or anyone in it. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Our baby. She'd been so focused on what this pregnancy meant in relation to her past that she hadn't fully processed what it meant for her future. This wasn't just proof that the doctor had lied. This was a child, a tiny human who would need food and warmth and love and protection. A child with Elias's eyes and her stubbornness. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt right. I want this, Clara said quietly. Not because of Iron Hollow, because of you, because of us. Elias's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I lost my first child, lost Sarah trying to bring him into the world. I swore I'd never put myself through that again, never risk caring about someone that much. His voice was rough. But here we are. Are you angry? No, I'm terrified, but not angry. Clara cupped his scarred face in her hands. We're going to be terrible at this. Probably. We don't know what we're doing. Not a clue. And we're stuck on a mountain in the middle of nowhere with no doctor and no help. Elias leaned forward and kissed her, soft and careful. Then we'll figure it out. Same way we figured out everything else. They held each other for a long time, two broken people trying to build something whole from pieces they didn't fully understand yet. That night, lying in bed with Elias's hand resting on her still flat stomach, Clara made a decision. I want to go back. Elias stiffened. Back where? Iron Hollow. When the road's clear. I want to go back and tell them the truth. Clara, no. Listen. She turned to face him in the darkness. That doctor destroyed my life with a lie. He took everything from me. My reputation, my family, my future. And I let him because I believed him. But I don't have to believe him anymore. I have proof now. You don't owe them anything. This isn't about owing them. This is about making sure they know what they did. Making sure every person who whispered about me, every person who treated me like I was cursed, has to face the fact that they were wrong. Her voice hardened. I want them to see me pregnant. Want them to understand that they threw me away based on a lie. Elias was quiet for a long moment. And what if going back puts you in danger? What if the people who paid that doctor to lie decide you're a threat? Then I'll deal with it. That's not good enough. You're carrying our child now. I'm not letting you walk into a situation that could get you killed. Clara felt anger flare in her chest. You're not letting me? I'm not asking permission, Elias. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. And I'm telling you it's a bad idea. They glared at each other in the darkness, both too stubborn to back down. Finally, Elias sighed. If you're going back, I'm coming with you. I didn't ask you to. I know, but you're going to get me anyway. His hand tightened on her stomach. This is my family now. Mine to protect. And I'm not letting you face those people alone. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle this herself. But the truth was, she was scared. Scared of what would happen when she walked back into Iron Hollow. Scared of what the Brennan family might do if they realized their lie was being exposed. Having Elias beside her didn't make her weak. It made her smart. "Okay," she said quietly. "We'll go together." "When?" "Late April, maybe early May. After the worst of the mud season passes and before I'm too pregnant to travel." Elias nodded against her shoulder. "We'll need supplies, money, and probably a gun that isn't a rifle." "You think it'll come to that?" "I think we should be prepared for anything." They fell silent, both lost in thoughts of what was coming. Clara tried to imagine walking back into Iron Hollow pregnant and proud, watching the townspeople realize their mistake. The fantasy was satisfying, but it was also incomplete, because exposing the lie wouldn't undo the damage it had caused. It wouldn't bring back the 6 months she'd lost to shame and humiliation, wouldn't repair her relationship with her family, wouldn't erase the memory of being tied up and sold like livestock. The best it could do was prevent it from happening to someone else. That thought settled into Clara's bones with quiet certainty. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making sure no other woman in Iron Hollow had to suffer the way she had, making sure Dr. Pritchard couldn't destroy any more lives with convenient diagnoses and well-paid lies. "I need to know who paid him," Clara said suddenly. Elias stirred. "What?" "The doctor. Someone paid him to say I was barren. I need to know who." She sat up, her mind racing. "If I'm going to expose this, I need proof. Real evidence, not just my word against his." "How are you going to get that?" "I don't know yet, but I have 2 months to figure it out." The next morning, Clara started planning. She made lists of everything she knew about the situation, the timeline of events, the people involved, the inconsistencies that had bothered her at the time, but that she'd been too devastated to question. Dr. Pritchard had examined her on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, Thomas's mother was already spreading the news of her barrenness. That meant the doctor had told the Brennans immediately, probably before Clara had even left his office. Why would he do that unless they'd asked him to examine her specifically? Clara thought back to the appointment. She'd gone to see the doctor about irregular cycles, something she'd been experiencing for months. But Mrs. Brennan had been the one who suggested she see Dr. Pritchard in the first place, during a seemingly innocent conversation about women's health. "You should have that looked at, dear," she'd said with false concern. "Dr. Pritchard is excellent with these matters. Very thorough. Very convenient." Clara kept digging through her memories, looking for proof. There had to be something she'd missed at the time, some detail that would connect the Brennans directly to the lie. Then she remembered the money. Thomas had given her an expensive bracelet 2 weeks before her doctor's appointment. A family heirloom, he'd said, to celebrate their engagement. Clara had worn it to the examination because she wore it everywhere. Dr. Pritchard had commented on it, had asked where she'd gotten something so valuable. She'd told him it was from the Brennans. 3 days later, he'd declared her barren and the engagement was broken. Clara's hands clenched into fists. The bracelet had been a marker, a way for the doctor to confirm he was examining the right woman. The Brennans had probably paid him before Clara ever walked through his door, with instructions to find something wrong with her. Anything that would justify breaking the engagement without making their son look like the villain. And if the doctor had been willing to lie about one woman, how many others had he lied about? Clara started asking Elias about other families in the area, other women who might have been examined by Dr. Pritchard. He knew surprisingly little about Iron Hollow's social dynamics, but he remembered hearing rumors. "There was a woman a few years back," he said one evening. "Emily something. She was engaged to a merchant's son, but the engagement ended suddenly. People said she had female troubles that made her unsuitable for marriage." "Did anyone say what kind of troubles?" "Same as yours. Couldn't have children." Clara felt ice settle in her stomach. "What happened to her?" "Don't know. She left town not long after. Heard she went east to live with relatives. Or maybe she was driven out. Same as they tried to do to me." Elias nodded grimly. "You might be right." Clara added Emily's name to her list. If she could find this woman, if she could get her to testify about similar circumstances, it would strengthen Clara's case tremendously. But finding someone who'd left Iron Hollow years ago would be nearly impossible, unless she had help. The idea came to Clara suddenly, fully formed. There was one person in Iron Hollow who might know where Emily had gone,
One person who saw and heard everything that happened in that town and had no loyalty to the Brennan family. Mrs. Fletcher, the postmistress. She was an older woman, a widow who'd run the Iron Hollow post office for 30 years. She knew every piece of mail that came in and out of that town, every letter and package and forwarding address. If Emily had left contact information with anyone, it would be with Mrs. Fletcher. Clara shared the idea with Elias. You think this postmistress will help you? I think she's the only person in that town who never treated me like I was contagious. She was always kind, even after the diagnosis. Clara paused. And her daughter died in childbirth 10 years ago. If she finds out a doctor has been lying about women's fertility, she'll want him stopped. That's a lot of assumptions. You have a better idea? Elias didn't. As March melted into April, Clara's pregnancy became impossible to ignore. The nausea got worse before it got better. There were mornings when she couldn't keep anything down, when even the smell of coffee made her stomach rebel. Elias learned to keep dry crackers by the bed and to brew weak tea instead of his usual strong coffee. Her body started changing in small ways. Her breasts swelled and became tender. Her waist thickened slightly, though she wasn't showing yet. She was constantly exhausted, falling asleep at odd hours like her body was demanding payment for the work of creating life. Elias watched over her with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. He wouldn't let her lift anything heavy, wouldn't let her go outside alone, started cooking all the meals himself because he didn't want her standing over the hot stove. Clara appreciated his concern, but it also drove her crazy. I'm pregnant, not dying, she snapped one afternoon after he'd insisted on carrying water from the well for the third time that week. I know that. Then stop treating me like I'm made of glass. Elias set down the water bucket carefully. My wife died in childbirth, bled out while I stood there watching, unable to do anything to save her. So forgive me if I'm a little cautious about you overexerting yourself. The anger drained out of Clara immediately. She'd known about Sarah's death, but Elias had never given her details, never told her exactly how he'd lost his first wife. The pain in his voice now made her chest ache. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't mean to dismiss what you went through, and I didn't mean to smother you. Elias ran a hand through his hair. I'm scared, Clara. Every day I'm scared that something's going to go wrong and I'm going to lose you the same way I lost Sarah, and I don't know how to turn that fear off. Clara crossed to him and took his hands. You're not going to lose me. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise to be careful, to listen to my body, to tell you if something feels wrong. She squeezed his hands. We're going to get through this together, all three of us. Elias pulled her close, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. They stood there in the cabin, surrounded by melting snow and the promise of spring, and tried to believe their own reassurances. By late April, the roads were finally passable. The snow had melted into mud and rushing streams, making travel difficult but not impossible. Elias spent a week preparing for the journey, checking equipment and planning routes. They couldn't take the horses directly through some of the worst mud, so they'd have to lead them on foot through certain sections. It would take at least 2 days to reach Iron Hollow, possibly 3. Clara was 12 weeks pregnant now, starting to show just slightly if you knew what to look for. She'd let out the waist on her dress, but she could only hide the pregnancy for maybe another month before it became obvious to everyone. That gave them a narrow window to make this trip. The night before they left, Clara packed a small bag with essentials. A change of clothes, some dried food, the evidence she'd collected about the doctor's lie. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. Elias was cleaning his guns at the table. You really think we'll need those? Clara asked, watching him work. Rather have them and not need them than need them and not have them. That's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be. He looked up at her. The Brennan family has money and influence. If they realize you're about to expose what they did, they might try to stop you. By killing me? By making you disappear. Same result. Clara felt cold fear settle in her stomach. She'd been so focused on the satisfaction of proving everyone wrong that she hadn't fully considered the danger. The Brennans had destroyed her reputation to protect their social standing. What would they do to protect themselves from actual criminal exposure? Maybe this is a bad idea, she said quietly. Elias stood and crossed to her. It's absolutely a bad idea, but it's also the right thing to do.
So we're going to be smart about it. We're going to be careful, and we're not going to let them see us coming until it's too late for them to stop it. How? By going to the postmistress first, getting her help tracking down this Emily woman, building a case that's bigger than just your word. He cupped Clara's face. Then we make it public in a way they can't silence. Town meeting, church service, somewhere with witnesses. Clara nodded slowly. And if it doesn't work, then we leave. We come back to the mountain and we build our life here and we never look back. Can you live with that? Elias kissed her forehead. I can live with anything as long as you're alive and with me. They left at dawn. The journey down the mountain was harder than Clara remembered. The trails were thick with mud that sucked at their boots and made the horses nervous. Streams that had been frozen solid in winter were now raging torrents they had to ford carefully. Clara's body protested every step. The pregnancy exhaustion hit her hard, made worse by the physical exertion of traveling. She had to stop frequently to rest, leaning against trees while Elias kept watch. The nausea was mostly gone, but it had been replaced by dizziness that came in waves. By the time they made camp the first night, Clara was completely spent. Elias built a fire and made her sit while he prepared food and set up their bedrolls. Clara wanted to help, wanted to pull her weight, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She just sat there feeling useless while Elias did everything. Stop looking like that, he said without turning around. Like what? Like you're failing some test. You're pregnant and exhausted. There's no shame in needing rest. I hate being weak. You're not weak. You're growing a human being inside your body. That takes more strength than anything I'll ever do. Claire felt tears prick at her eyes. Pregnancy had made her emotional in ways that embarrassed her. She cried at everything now. Happy things, sad things, things that had no business making her cry at all. Elias finished cooking and brought her a plate of food. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and they ate in comfortable silence. Tell me about Sarah, Clara said suddenly. Elias went still. Why? Because you're comparing me to her. Every time I struggle, every time something goes wrong, I can see you thinking about her. Clara set down her plate. I need to know what happened. All of it. Elias was quiet for so long, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started talking. Sarah was small, barely 5 feet tall, tiny build. When she got pregnant, everyone said she was too small to carry safely. The midwife warned us it would be dangerous. But Sarah wanted the baby so badly she didn't care about the risk. His voice was hollow. Labor started early. She was only 8 months along. It went on for 2 days. 2 days of her screaming and bleeding and begging for it to stop. Clara reached for his hand. The baby was breech. The midwife tried to turn him but couldn't. Eventually she got him out, but the damage was done. Sarah bled too much. There was nothing anyone could do. Elias's hand tightened on Clara's. Jacob lived for 6 hours, just long enough for me to hold him. Then he stopped breathing. I'm so sorry. Everyone said it was nature's way, that some women aren't meant to survive childbirth, that it was tragic but unavoidable. He looked at Clara, his eyes haunted. But I keep thinking if we'd had a real doctor instead of just a midwife, maybe things would have been different. Maybe she'd still be alive. Clara understood now why Elias was so protective, so fearful. He'd watched helplessly while the woman he loved died, bringing his child into the world. The trauma of that experience had carved itself into his bones. I'm not Sarah, Clara said gently. I'm bigger, stronger, and I'm going to fight like hell to survive this. For you, for our baby, and for myself. Promise me something. What? If it comes down to choosing between you and the baby, you'll let them choose you. Clara's throat tightened. Elias? Promise me, Clara. I can't go through that again. Can't watch another woman I love die trying to give me a child. If something goes wrong, if they have to make a choice, I want you alive, even if it means losing the baby. The words should have been shocking, maybe even cruel, but Clara understood the desperation behind them, understood that Elias was trying to protect himself from a trauma so deep it had nearly destroyed him once already. I promise, she whispered. They held each other beside the fire, while night settled around them, two people bound together by fear and hope and love too fragile to name. They reached Iron Hollow late the following afternoon. The town looked exactly as Clara remembered.
as if time had frozen the moment she'd been dragged away. The same storefronts lined the main street. The same houses sat on the same plots of land. Even the people looked familiar, going about their daily business with the comfortable routine of those who'd never had their entire world destroyed. Clara felt her stomach clench with a mixture of rage and fear. "You ready for this?" Elias asked quietly. "No, but let's do it anyway." They left the horses at a stable on the edge of town and walked to the post office. Clara kept her head down, trying not to draw attention. A few people glanced at her curiously, but no one seemed to recognize her yet. The post office was a small building wedged between the general store and a law office. Mrs. Fletcher sat behind the counter sorting mail with practiced efficiency. She looked up when they entered, and her eyes went wide. "Clara Whitfield? Is that really you?"
"It's me, Mrs. Fletcher." The older woman came around the counter quickly, her expression a mixture of shock and concern. "Dear girl, we all thought you were dead. When your father came back without you, he said you'd been sold to some mountain man. Nobody expected to see you again. I'm not dead, just far away." Clara glanced at Elias. "This is Elias Boone. He's my husband."
Mrs. Fletcher's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied Elias, taking in his size and scars and the way he positioned himself protectively beside Clara. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded. "Well then, I suppose congratulations are in order." She gestured toward a back room. "Come, let's talk privately." They followed her into a small office cluttered with mailbags and ledgers. Mrs. Fletcher shut the door firmly and turned to face them. "Now then, what brings you back to Iron Hollow? And please don't tell me it's just a friendly visit, because I can see trouble written all over both of you." Clara took a breath. "I need to find Emily Hartford." Mrs. Fletcher's expression shifted. "Why?" "Because I think Dr. Pritchard lied to both of us. Told us we were barren when we weren't, and I think someone paid him to do it." The older woman sank into her chair heavily. "You have proof?" "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like an explosion. Mrs. Fletcher stared at Clara's stomach, her face going through a series of expressions: shock, understanding, fury. "That lying bastard," she whispered. "Will you help me find Emily?" Mrs. Fletcher stood and moved to a filing cabinet in the corner. She pulled out a ledger and flipped through pages with shaking hands. "Emily Hartford left Iron Hollow 3 years ago, went to stay with an aunt in Denver. She still writes occasionally, sends letters to her mother who lives on Maple Street." "Is her mother still here?"
"Yes, but she's not well. The shame of what happened to Emily broke her." Mrs. Fletcher wrote down an address and handed it to Clara. "If you're going to do this, do it right. Don't let that doctor destroy anyone else." Clara took the address. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. The Brennans won't take kindly to being exposed. They own half this town." Mrs. Fletcher looked at Elias. "You know how to use those guns you're carrying?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. You're going to need them."
They left the post office just as dusk was settling over Iron Hollow. The street lamps were being lit one by one, casting pools of yellow light across the muddy roads. Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to make herself smaller, less visible. Emily Hartford's mother lived in a narrow house on the edge of town, paint peeling and shutters hanging crooked. The place looked as broken as Mrs. Fletcher had described its occupant. Clara knocked on the door, her heart hammering. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. Finally, the door cracked open. A thin woman with gray hair and hollow eyes peered out. "Whatever you're selling, I don't want it." "Mrs. Hartford, my name is Clara Whitfield. I need to talk to you about your daughter Emily." The woman's face went pale. "Emily doesn't live here anymore." "I know, but I need to contact her. It's important." "Why? What do you want with my daughter?" Clara glanced around, aware they were standing on a public street where anyone could see them. "Can we come inside, please? This isn't something I can explain out here." Mrs. Hartford's eyes flicked to Elias, taking in his size and the guns at his belt. Fear flickered across her face. "I don't know you." "I know. But 3 years ago, Dr. Pritchard told your daughter she was barren, told her she'd never have children." "He told me the same thing 6 months ago." Clara's voice hardened. "And he was lying." The door opened wider. Mrs. Hartford ushered them inside quickly, checking the street before closing the door. The house was dim and sparsely furnished, everything worn and faded. She didn't offer them seats, just stood there wringing her hands. "You said he was lying. How do you know?" "Because I'm pregnant." Clara placed a hand on her stomach. 3 months along, which means Dr. Pritchard either didn't know what he was doing or someone paid him to say I couldn't have children. Mrs. Hartford's legs seemed to give out. She sank onto a threadbare sofa, her face crumpling. "I knew it. I knew something wasn't right. Emily was always healthy, never had any problems. Then she goes to see that doctor and suddenly she's unsuitable for marriage?" Her voice broke. Her fiancé's family ended the engagement within days. Emily was so ashamed she left town and never came back. "Did the fiancé's family have money?" Elias asked. "The Carsons. They owned the lumber mill. Not as rich as the Brennans, but wealthy enough." Mrs. Hartford looked up at them. "You think they paid the doctor to lie?" "I think it's possible," Clara said. "And if he did it to Emily and to me, he probably did it to others." "What are you going to do?" "Expose him. Make sure everyone in Iron Hollow knows what he's done. But I need Emily's help. Need her to come forward and tell her story." Mrs. Hartford shook her head slowly. "Emily won't come back here. This town destroyed her. She's built a new life in Denver, gotten engaged to a good man who doesn't know anything about what happened. Why would she risk all that?" "Because other women are at risk. Right now, today, there could be someone sitting in Dr. Pritchard's office being told the same lie that destroyed Emily's life here." Clara's voice was fierce. "If we don't stop him, he'll keep doing this. And if Emily comes forward, everyone will know her shame. Her new fiancé will find out. She could lose everything again." Clara felt her resolve waver. She hadn't considered that asking Emily to testify might destroy the new life she'd built. It felt wrong to ask someone who'd already suffered so much to sacrifice even more. Elias spoke up. "What if she didn't have to come back? What if she just wrote a letter detailing what happened, something Clara could present as evidence?" Mrs. Hartford considered this. "I could write to her, explain the situation, but I can't promise she'll help." "That's all I'm asking. Just give her the choice." The older woman stood and moved to a small writing desk in the corner. She pulled out paper and a pen, her hands shaking slightly. "This will take a few days. Emily won't get the letter for at least a week, and then she'll need time to decide." "We can wait," Clara said, though the words tasted like ash. Every day they spent in Iron Hollow was another day the Brennans could discover what they were planning. Mrs. Hartford wrote the letter while Clara and Elias watched, her pen scratching across the paper with deliberate care. When she finished, she sealed it and promised to send it first thing in the morning. "Where are you staying?" she asked as she walked them to the door. Clara hesitated. She hadn't thought that far ahead. Going to her parents' house was out of the question. They'd sold her. She had no intention of seeking their hospitality now. "We'll find somewhere," Elias said. Mrs. Hartford pressed some coins into Clara's hand. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Chen runs it. Tell her I sent you. She doesn't ask questions." They thanked her and left. The boarding house was a 2-story building that had seen better days but was clean and well-maintained. Mrs. Chen was a small Chinese woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked Clara and Elias over with frank assessment. 2 nights, paid in advance," she said in accented English. "No cooking in the rooms, no loud noise after 9. You break something, you pay for it." They paid and followed her upstairs to a small room with a narrow bed and a single window overlooking the street. It wasn't much, but it was private. Elias checked the window locks and the door before finally relaxing slightly. "We should stay inside as much as possible. The less people see you, the better." "I can't hide the entire time we're here." "I know, but we need to be smart." He sat on the bed and started cleaning his guns with methodical precision. "The Brennans are going to find out you're in town eventually. When they do, things will get complicated." Clara moved to the window and looked out at Iron Hollow's dark streets. Somewhere out there was her father's house. Somewhere was the doctor's office where her life had been destroyed. Somewhere was the Brennan mansion where the lie had been conceived. She'd spent months believing she'd never see this town again. Now she was back, and the fear was almost overwhelming. "What if this doesn't work?" she asked quietly. "What if Emily won't help? What if nobody believes us?" Elias set down his gun and crossed to her. "Then we go home, back to the mountain, and we raise our child as far away from these people as possible. Is that enough for you?"
You're enough for me. Everything else is just details. Clara turned to face him. I don't want our child growing up knowing I ran away. Don't want them thinking their mother was too scared to fight. There's a difference between running away and making a strategic retreat. Is there? Yeah. One keeps you alive. Elias cupped her face. I need you to understand something. I will burn this entire town to the ground before I let anyone hurt you. I don't care about justice or revenge or making people pay. I care about you being safe.
The intensity in his voice made Clara shiver. She'd seen glimpses of the violence Elias was capable of, heard the stories of what he'd done to the men who killed his family, but this was the first time she'd felt it directed at protecting her. It should have scared her. Instead, it made her feel powerful.
I love you, she said. I know, that's what terrifies me.
They slept fitfully that night, both jerking awake at every sound from the street below. Clara dreamed of her father tying her wrists, of the cold mountain trail, of Dr. Pritchard's cold eyes as he pronounced her worthless. She woke before dawn, nauseous and disoriented. Elias was already awake, sitting by the window watching the street. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes.
Did you sleep at all?
Clara asked.
Some. Liar. He almost smiled. Someone needs to keep watch. We're in a boarding house, not a war zone. Tell me that when the Brennans find out you're here. Clara got up and started getting dressed. The nausea was worse this morning, probably from stress and lack of proper rest. She forced herself to eat some of the dried bread they'd brought, knowing the baby needed food even if she didn't want it. What's the plan for today? Elias asked. We wait. Give Mrs. Hartford time to send that letter. Try not to draw attention. And when the waiting gets too hard? Clara didn't have an answer. They spent the morning in the room, taking turns watching the street and trying to occupy themselves with nothing. It was the worst kind of waiting, the kind where every minute stretched into an hour and there was nothing to do but think. By afternoon, Clara couldn't stand it anymore. I need to walk, need to move around or I'm going to lose my mind. Elias looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded. All right, but I'm coming with you and we stay away from the main street. They left the boarding house and walked the back alleys of Iron Hollow, staying in the shadows. Clara saw familiar landmarks from different angles, places she'd known her whole life suddenly looking foreign and hostile. They passed the schoolhouse where she'd learned to read, the church where she'd been baptized, the general store where she'd bought candy as a child.
Every building held memories of a life that no longer belonged to her.
You miss it? Elias asked, watching her face.
Parts of it. The parts before everything went wrong. Clara paused beside a fence, looking across the street at her family's house. I had friends here, had a future. Then one lie took all of it away. You have a future now. Different one, but still a future. Do I? Or am I just surviving? Elias turned her to face him. You're building a life. With me, with our child, with whatever comes next. That's not just surviving. That's choosing to keep going even when it would be easier to quit. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to think that the life they were building in the mountains was enough. But standing here in Iron Hollow, seeing everything she'd lost, the anger came flooding back. She wanted these people to hurt the way she'd hurt, wanted them to feel the shame and humiliation they'd heaped on her, wanted them to understand that they'd thrown away something precious and real for the sake of lies and social standing. Clara. She turned to find a woman staring at her from across the street. Margaret Wells, one of Clara's childhood friends, someone she'd played with and trusted and thought would always be in her life. Margaret's eyes went wide with recognition, then her face twisted into something ugly. You have the nerve to show your face here? Margaret's voice was loud enough to draw attention. After what you did? Clara felt her stomach drop. What I did? Don't play innocent. Everyone knows you seduced that mountain man into buying you, played the victim when really you just wanted an excuse to run off with someone rich enough to keep you. The accusation was so absurd, Clara almost laughed. You think I wanted to be sold? I think you're a liar and a whore, and you should have stayed wherever you've been hiding. Other people were stopping now, gathering to watch the confrontation. Clara recognized faces from her past, people who'd whispered about her, people who'd turned their backs when she needed help. Elias moved to Clara's side, his presence a silent warning. Margaret's eyes flicked to him, and fear crossed her face.
Is this him? The savage who bought you? Watch your mouth, Elias said quietly, but the threat in his voice was unmistakable. Or what? You'll drag me off to the mountains too? Clara put a hand on Elias's arm, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. Let's go. Yeah, run away again, Margaret called after them. That's all you're good for.
They walked quickly back toward the boarding house, Clara's face burning with humiliation and rage. People were staring now, whispering to each other. Word would spread through Iron Hollow within hours that Clara Whitfield had returned, which meant the Brennans would know by nightfall. We should leave, Elias said when they got back to the room. Right now, before this gets worse. No. Clara.
I said no. She was shaking with anger. I'm not running away again. I'm not letting these people win. This isn't about winning. It's about staying alive. Then what was the point of coming back at all? Clara's voice rose. What was the point of getting Mrs. Hartford to write that letter if we're just going to leave before Emily can respond? The point was to try. We tried. Now we need to accept it's too dangerous and go. You're asking me to give up.
I'm asking you to choose your battles. They glared at each other, both too stubborn and scared to back down. Clara knew Elias was right on a practical level. Staying in Iron Hollow was dangerous. Every hour they remained increased the risk of violence, but leaving now felt like surrendering, felt like admitting the town was right about her all along. A knock on the door interrupted their argument. Elias had his gun drawn instantly, positioning himself between Clara and the door. Who is it? Mrs. Chen, you have a visitor. Clara and Elias exchanged glances. Who would be visiting them? Elias opened the door carefully, keeping the gun ready. Mrs. Chen stood in the hallway with a well-dressed older man Clara didn't recognize. This gentleman says he needs to speak with you urgently, Mrs. Chen said. I told him you weren't receiving visitors, but he was quite insistent. The man stepped forward. My name is James Whitmore. I'm a lawyer here in Iron Hollow. May I come in? Clara's mind raced. A lawyer? What would a lawyer want with them? Elias didn't lower the gun. State your business. Whitmore glanced at Mrs. Chen, clearly uncomfortable discussing this in the hallway. It concerns Dr. Pritchard and certain allegations that have come to my attention. I believe we have mutual interests that should be discussed privately. Clara made a decision. Let him in. Elias looked like he wanted to argue, but he stepped aside. Whitmore entered and Mrs. Chen retreated downstairs, though Clara suspected she'd be listening at the bottom of the stairs. Whitmore removed his hat and set it on the small table. He was perhaps 60, with gray hair and the kind of face that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. Thank you for seeing me. I'll be direct. Word has already spread through town that you've returned, Miss Whitfield. Or should I say Mrs. Boone? How do you know who we are? Because I make it my business to know what happens in this town, and because I've been waiting for someone to challenge Dr. Pritchard for a very long time. Clara's heart skipped. What do you mean? Whitmore sat down without being invited, the gesture of a man used to taking charge of situations. I represent 3 women whose lives were destroyed by diagnoses from Dr. Pritchard, diagnoses that I believe were fraudulent. Emily Hartford is one of them. The room went silent. You've been investigating him? Clara asked. For 2 years, since my niece became his 4th victim, but I've never had enough evidence to bring charges. The women are too ashamed to testify, and the families who paid for the false diagnoses have too much power. He looked at Clara directly. Until now. What makes me different? You're pregnant. You're walking, breathing proof that the doctor lied. And more importantly, you're angry enough to fight back. Clara felt something shift in her chest. You said 4 victims. Who are the others besides Emily and your niece? Whitmore pulled a folded paper from his coat. Catherine Miller, falsely diagnosed as barren 3 years ago. Sarah Chen, told she had a diseased womb 2 years ago. My niece Rebecca Whitmore, same diagnosis as you, 6 months before you were examined. He set the paper on the table. 4 women from 4 different wealthy families. All engagements broken within days of the diagnosis. You're saying this is a pattern. I'm saying it's a business. The doctor gets paid to find problems that don't exist. Wealthy families get out of unwanted engagements without looking like villains, and the women bear all the shame. Elias had been silent until now. What do you want from us? I want Clara to testify before the town council. I want her to stand up in front of everyone and tell them what happened. Show them she's pregnant. Prove the doctor is a fraud.
That's suicide, Elias said flatly. The Brennans will kill her before they let her testify.
Not if we do it publicly. Not if we make it so that silencing her would only prove our point. Whitmore leaned forward. There's a town meeting tomorrow night. Everyone will be there. If Clara stands up and tells her story, if she shows them her pregnancy, the Brennans can't stop it without revealing their involvement.
Clara's mind was spinning. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? The chance to expose the truth in front of everyone. To watch the people who'd destroyed her realize they'd been complicit in a cruel lie. But it was also terrifying. "What about the other women?" she asked. "Will they testify?" "Catherine Miller is dead.
Took her own life a year ago." Whitmore's voice was heavy. "Sarah Chen might testify if she sees Clara stand up first. And I've already written to Emily Hartford explaining the situation."
"You wrote to her?"
2 days ago. I've been tracking your movements since you arrived in town, Miss Whitfield. I knew what you were planning. The admission should have felt invasive, but Clara only felt relief. She wasn't alone in this anymore. There was someone else who understood what Dr. Pritchard had done. Someone with the legal knowledge to make the charges stick. "If I testify," Clara said slowly, "what happens to the doctor?" "He'll be arrested. His medical license will be revoked. He'll likely face criminal charges for fraud and potentially worse if we can prove conspiracy with the Brennan family. And the Brennans? That depends on what evidence we can gather. But at minimum, their reputation will be destroyed. Thomas Brennan will be known as the man whose family paid to ruin an innocent woman's life." The thought sent satisfaction coursing through Clara's veins, but Elias was shaking his head. "It's too dangerous. You're asking her to paint a target on her back." "I'm asking her to take a risk for something bigger than herself," Whitmore countered. "How many more women will Dr. Pritchard destroy if nobody stops him? How many more young girls will be told they're worthless based on lies? That's not Clara's responsibility. Maybe not, but it's her choice." They both looked at Clara. She stood there feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to run, to protect herself and her baby, to choose safety over justice. But if she ran now, the pattern would continue. Other women would sit in Dr. Pritchard's office and have their lives destroyed by convenient diagnoses. Other families would pay for lies. Other girls would be sold or driven out of town because some wealthy family wanted to avoid embarrassment. Clara thought about Catherine Miller taking her own life, thought about Emily Hartford rebuilding from scratch in a distant city, thought about Rebecca Whitmore and Sarah Chen carrying shame that wasn't theirs, thought about her own child growing up in a world where powerful people could destroy lives without consequences. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "Clara, no," Elias started. "I'll do it," she repeated, louder this time. "I'll testify at the town meeting. I'll tell everyone what happened, and I'll make sure they understand exactly who's responsible." Whitmore stood and offered his hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Boone. You're braver than you know." Clara didn't feel brave. She felt terrified. But she shook his hand anyway. After Whitmore left, Elias paced the room like a caged animal. "This is wrong. Everything about this feels wrong." "I know. Then why are you doing it?" Clara sat on the bed, exhausted suddenly. "Because someone has to. Because if I don't, nothing changes. The doctor keeps lying, the Brennans keep destroying lives, and women keep suffering. And what about our child? What happens if the Brennans decide to make you disappear? Then you make sure our baby knows their mother fought for something that mattered." Elias stopped pacing and stared at her. "Don't talk like that." "I'm being realistic. You're being fatalistic. There's a difference." He knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "I can't lose you, Clara. I can't go through that again." "You won't have to. We're going to be smart about this. We're going to have Whitmore there and witnesses, and we're going to make it so public that the Brennans can't touch me without exposing themselves. That's a lot of faith in public opinion, stopping rich people from doing whatever they want." "You have a better idea?" Elias didn't. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Whitmore returned with documents for Clara to review, statements from the other victims, a timeline of the doctor's fraudulent diagnoses. Clara read everything, committing details to memory. The pattern was damning. Every woman had been examined right before her engagement was supposed to be finalized.
Every diagnosis had come within days of the examination. Every family involved had wealth and social standing to protect. And every woman had been destroyed by shame. Catherine Miller had hanged herself in her father's barn. Sarah Chen had fled to California and never contacted her family again. Emily Hartford had disappeared to Denver and rebuilt her life from nothing. Rebecca Whitmore had survived, but she'd never married, never trusted anyone enough to try again. 4 lives ruined, 4 families paid, 1 doctor getting rich off convenient lies. Clara felt rage burning in her chest. Tomorrow night, that would end. The town meeting was held in the largest building in Iron Hollow, the church. By the time Clara and Elias arrived, every pew was packed. People stood along the walls and crowded the aisles. Word had spread that something important was going to happen, and nobody wanted to miss it. Clara saw her father sitting near the front, looking older and harder than she remembered. Her mother sat beside him, her face carefully blank. None of her sisters had come, but Clara suspected they'd been forbidden. Thomas Brennan sat with his parents in the place of honor, right at the front. He looked exactly the same, handsome and soft and utterly untroubled by conscience. His mother was a stern woman in expensive clothes, her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Dr. Pritchard sat 2 rows behind them, looking confident and comfortable. Clara's hands clenched into fists. Whitmore stood at the front of the church, shuffling papers. When he saw Clara, he nodded slightly. This was it. Elias stayed close to Clara's side as they found seats near the back. She could feel people staring, hear the whispers spreading through the crowd. That's her, the Whitfield girl who got sold. I heard she came back to cause trouble. She's got some nerve showing her face here. Clara kept her head high and her hand on her stomach, where the small swell of pregnancy was just barely visible beneath her dress. The town mayor called the meeting to order. Standard business was discussed first: road repairs, property disputes, budget allocations. Clara barely heard any of it. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone in the church must be able to hear it. Finally, Whitmore stood. I have a matter of urgent concern to bring before the council and this community. It involves accusations of fraud and malpractice against one of our town's most trusted citizens. The church went completely silent. Over the past 3 years, at least 4 young women in this town have been diagnosed as barren or otherwise unable to bear children by Dr. Raymond Pritchard. All 4 of these diagnoses came at convenient times for wealthy families seeking to break marriage engagements. All 4 of these women have had their lives destroyed by shame and social ostracism. Whitmore's voice carried through the church, and at least one of these diagnoses was completely, provably false. Dr. Pritchard stood up. This is outrageous. I will not sit here and be slandered by some lawyer with a grudge. Then perhaps you'd like to explain how Clara Whitfield Boone is currently 3 months pregnant, despite your diagnosis declaring her permanently barren? Every head in the church turned to look at Clara. She stood slowly, her legs shaking. Elias rose with her, his presence solid and protective beside her. It's true, Clara said, her voice carrying clearly. 6 months ago, Dr. Pritchard examined me and told me I would never have children. He said I was barren, completely sterile. Within days, my engagement was broken. Within weeks, I'd been sold by my own father to a stranger. Her father's face went red, but he didn't speak. But the doctor was wrong, or more accurately, he lied. Clara placed both hands on her stomach. I'm pregnant. Have been for 3 months, which means either Dr. Pritchard is incompetent or he was paid to destroy my reputation. The church erupted in chaos. People were shouting, some in disbelief, some in anger. Mrs. Brennan stood up, her face white with fury. This is absurd. The woman is obviously lying to get revenge. Then let's bring in a midwife to examine her, Whitmore suggested calmly. Right now, in front of witnesses. If she's not pregnant, we'll know she's lying. If she is, we'll know the doctor is. Mrs. Brennan looked trapped. She couldn't agree to the examination without risking proof of Clara's pregnancy, but refusing made her look guilty. Before she could respond, another voice spoke up. I was told I was barren, too. Clara turned to see Sarah Chen standing near the back of the church. She was a small woman, younger than Clara, with fear written all over her face. But she was standing. Dr. Pritchard told me 2 years ago that I had a diseased womb, that I'd never carry a child to term. My engagement was broken the next day. Sarah's voice shook. I left town because I couldn't stand the shame, but if Clara Whitfield is brave enough to stand up here,
Then I am too.
Another woman stood. Then another. Women Clara didn't even recognize, all with similar stories, all with the same pattern of diagnosis and destroyed engagement. The doctor had been doing this for years. Dr. Pritchard was backing toward the door now, his confident mask cracking. This is a conspiracy. These women are lying. Then explain the pattern, Whitmore demanded. Explain why every single one of your barren diagnoses happened right before wealthy families needed to break engagements. Explain the timing. The doctor had no answer. Thomas Brennan stood up, his face pale. This is ridiculous. My family had nothing to do with... You broke our engagement within hours of Clara's diagnosis, Elias interrupted, his voice cold. How did you even know about it so fast unless the doctor told your family first? Thomas went silent. Mrs. Brennan grabbed her son's arm. We're leaving. We don't have to listen to these slanderous accusations. But they couldn't leave. The crowd was too thick, and people were angry now. Years of trusting the doctor, years of watching women be destroyed, and suddenly it all looked like a carefully constructed lie. The mayor was shouting for order, but nobody was listening. Clara felt Elias's hand on her arm, steady and grounding. She'd done it. She'd told her story in front of everyone, proven that the doctor had lied, but she'd also started something she couldn't control. The crowd was turning ugly, people shouting accusations, demanding answers. Someone threw something at Dr. Pritchard. Someone else grabbed at Mrs. Brennan's expensive coat. We need to leave, Elias said urgently. Now. He pulled Clara toward a side door, away from the chaos. Whitmore followed, helping clear a path. They burst out into the cold night air, Clara gasping for breath. Behind them, the church was in complete turmoil. What happens now? Clara asked. Whitmore adjusted his coat, looking grimly satisfied. Now the town destroys itself trying to assign blame. The doctor will be arrested by morning, the Brennan family will be investigated, and you, Mrs. Boone, will be known as the woman who brought down Iron Hollow's biggest lie. Will I be safe? For tonight, stay at the boarding house with your door locked. Tomorrow, I'd suggest leaving town before the Brennans figure out that public opinion won't protect you forever. They made it back to Mrs. Chen's intense silence. Claire's entire body was shaking with adrenaline and fear. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. But the victory felt hollow somehow. Inside their room, Elias locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle. Then he pulled Clara into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. Don't ever scare me like that again, he said roughly. I had to do it. I know. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Clara pulled back to look at him. What if nothing changes? What if we leave tomorrow and everything just goes back to normal? It won't. You made sure of that. Elias cupped her face. You stood in front of everyone who hurt you and told the truth. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done. And people won't forget it. Clara wanted to believe him. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to angry voices in the streets below, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd set something dangerous in motion. Something that wouldn't end with just her testimony. The first rock came through the window at 3 a.m. Glass exploded across the floor, and Clara jerked awake with a scream. Elias was already moving, pulling her off the bed and onto the floor behind it. Another rock followed, then another, accompanied by shouting from the street below. Liar! Whore! You destroyed this town! Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Elias crawled to the window and peered out carefully. 4 men, maybe 5, can't tell if they're armed. What do they want? To scare us. Maybe worse. He moved back to Clara and pressed his revolver into her hands. You remember how to use this? Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Yes. Good. Stay down. Don't shoot unless you have to. More rocks hit the building. Mrs. Chen was shouting something in Chinese from downstairs. Then Clara heard the unmistakable sound of a shotgun being racked. The shouting outside stopped abruptly. Mrs. Chen's voice rang out, sharp and furious. You break my windows. You pay for them. Get away from my house or I shoot. There was muttering, some angry protests, then the sound of footsteps retreating. The street went quiet again, but the tension didn't ease. Elias stayed by the window, watching. They're gone. For now. Clara was still on the floor, clutching the gun, her whole body shaking. This was a mistake. We never should have come back. Too late for that now. We need to leave. Tonight. They'll be watching the roads, waiting for us to run. Elias finally moved away from the window and helped Clara back onto the bed, carefully avoiding the broken glass. We leave at first light. Pack light, move fast. Get back to the mountain before anyone can organize against us. Clara nodded, unable to speak. She'd known there would be consequences to her testimony, but she hadn't anticipated violence this quickly. The men outside had sounded genuinely furious, like she'd personally wronged them by exposing the truth. Maybe in their minds she had. Iron Hollow's comfortable illusions had been shattered. The wealthy families they'd trusted were corrupt. The doctor they'd relied on was a fraud. Their entire social structure had been built on convenient lies, and Clara had kicked out the foundation. Of course they were angry. She was easier to blame than accepting they'd been complicit all along. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, holding her shotgun, surveying the damage with a grim expression. "You bring trouble to my house." "I'm sorry," Clara said. "We'll pay for the window." "You pay, and you leave. Tonight is bad. Tomorrow will be worse." The older woman's eyes softened slightly. "You have courage, but courage doesn't stop rocks or bullets." She left them to clean up the glass. They didn't sleep the rest of the night. Elias kept watch while Clara packed their few belongings, moving quietly in the darkness. Every sound from outside made her freeze, certain the mob was returning. But the night stayed quiet. Just before dawn, there was a soft knock at the door. Elias had his gun drawn instantly. "Who is it?" "James Whitmore." Elias opened the door cautiously. The lawyer stood in the hallway looking exhausted and worried. "I heard about the attack. Are you both all right?" "We're leaving," Clara said, "as soon as there's enough light to see the road." "That might be wise. Things got worse after you left the church last night." Whitmore stepped inside and closed the door. "Dr. Pritchard tried to flee town around midnight, got caught at the border by a group of angry fathers whose daughters he'd diagnosed. They're holding him at the jail, but I'm not sure how long the sheriff can protect him." "Good," Clara said coldly. "Let him feel what it's like to be hunted." "Clara," Elias started. "No. I'm not going to pretend to feel sorry for him. He destroyed lives for money. Whatever happens to him now, he earned it." Whitmore pulled a folded document from his coat. "Before you go, I need you to sign this. It's an official statement of your testimony. With your signature, I can pursue criminal charges even after you've left." Clara took the document and read it quickly. It detailed everything: the examination, the diagnosis, the broken engagement, the sale to Elias, and her current pregnancy. Seeing it all written down in legal language made it feel more real somehow. She signed. "What about the Brennans?" she asked, handing it back. "Thomas Brennan confessed early this morning. Apparently his conscience got the better of him after your testimony." Whitmore's smile was grim. "He admitted his mother paid the doctor $500 to examine you and find something wrong. Any excuse to break the engagement would do, but barrenness was particularly effective." $500. That's what Clara's life had been worth to them, not even the price of a good horse. "What happens to them?" Elias asked. "Criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud, civil suits from the other victims' families, and complete social destruction. The Brennan name is finished in Iron Hollow." Whitmore paused. "Your father is facing charges too. Selling a human being, even a daughter, is illegal. He'll likely see prison time." Clara felt nothing at that news. No satisfaction, no sadness, nothing. Her father had made his choice when he tied her wrists and sold her for 50 coins. Whatever consequences he faced now were his own doing. "I need to ask you something," Clara said to Whitmore. "All those women who stood up last night, what happens to them now?" "Sarah Chen is pressing charges against the doctor. 2 others are considering it. The town is in chaos, but that chaos is forcing people to confront what they allowed to happen." He met her eyes. "You started something important, Mrs. Boone. It won't be clean or easy, but it needed to happen." "Will they be safe, the women who testified?" "I'll do everything I can to protect them, but I can't make promises." Whitmore's expression was honest. "The world isn't fair, and justice isn't guaranteed, but sometimes all we can do is tell the truth and hope it matters." Those words stayed with Clara as they finished packing. Tell the truth and hope it matters. She'd done that. Whether it changed anything long-term remained to be seen. They left Mrs. Chen's boarding house as the sun was rising. The street was empty except for a few early workers who quickly averted their eyes when they saw Clara. Word had spread fast. She was either a hero or a villain, depending on who you asked. Their horses were still at the stable, but when they arrived, they found the stable master waiting with a grim expression. "You're the Whitfield girl," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Clara Boone," she corrected, "here to collect our horses." "Can't do that." Elias's hand moved toward his gun. "Why not?" "Because they're not here anymore. Brennan family's men came by last night, took your horses and said you wouldn't be needing them." Clara felt rage boil up in her chest. "They stole our horses?" "I tried to stop them, but they had guns and numbers." The stable master looked genuinely apologetic. "Best I can do is loan you 2 mounts, but you'll need to return them eventually." It was better than nothing. They took the borrowed horses and started riding north, away from Iron Hollow. Clara didn't look back. There was nothing in that town she wanted to see again. The journey was harder than she'd anticipated. The pregnancy exhaustion hit her worse than before, probably from stress and lack of sleep. They had to stop frequently for Clara to rest, which made Elias increasingly nervous. "We're too exposed out here," he muttered during their third stop. "If the Brennans send men after us, we won't see them coming." "Then we keep moving." Clara forced herself back onto the horse, despite her body's protests. "We're not stopping until we're home." Home. The mountain cabin that had started as her prison had become the only place she truly wanted to be. They rode through the day, pushing the horses as hard as they dared. By nightfall, they were only halfway to the mountain, forced to make camp in a small clearing off the main road. Elias built a tiny fire, just enough for warmth, and kept his rifle close. Clara tried to eat but couldn't keep anything down. The stress was making her sick, and she knew that wasn't good for the baby. "You need to rest," Elias said, watching her struggle. "I'm fine." "You're pale as death, and you can barely sit upright. You're not fine." He moved closer, pressing a hand to her forehead. "You feel warm. You might be getting sick." "I'm just tired." "Clara, if something happens to you out here, it won't. I'm not Sarah. Stop waiting for me to die." The words came out harsher than she'd intended. Elias flinched like she'd struck him. "I'm sorry," Clara said immediately. "I didn't mean that." "Yes, you did, and you're right." Elias sat back, staring into the fire. "I've been so focused on keeping you alive that I haven't been seeing you, just seeing Sarah dying over and over again." "Elias, let me finish. When Sarah was pregnant, I was terrified every single day. Kept waiting for something to go wrong, and when it did, when she started bleeding and screaming, all I could do was watch. I couldn't save her, couldn't even make it hurt less." His voice cracked. "I swore I'd never put myself through that again, but then you showed up, and despite every promise I made to myself, I fell in love with you. And now you're pregnant, and all those old fears came rushing back." Clara moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. "I'm scared too. Scared something will go wrong. Scared I won't be strong enough when the time comes. Scared our baby won't survive." She placed his hand on her stomach. "But I need you to believe I can do this. Need you to see me as someone who's fighting, not someone who's dying." Elias was quiet for a long moment, his hand warm against her belly. "I see you. I see how strong you are, how brave. I've seen you survive things that would have broken most people." He looked at her. "But I'm still scared." "Then we'll be scared together, but we won't let that fear control us." They held each other beside the small fire while darkness settled around them. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The sound should have been frightening, but instead it felt almost welcoming. The wolves were home, and soon they would be too. They reached the mountain cabin 2 days later, exhausted and dirty, but alive. The sight of it made Clara's chest tighten with relief. The small wooden structure looked exactly the same, solid and weathered, smoke already rising from the chimney. Wait, smoke? Elias saw it at the same moment. He pulled his rifle and gestured for Clara to stay back. They approached cautiously, and Elias kicked open the door with his gun raised. Inside, Mrs. Fletcher sat calmly at their table, drinking tea. "About time you got back," she said. "I've been waiting for 3 hours, and your coffee is terrible." Clara stared. "What are you doing here?" "Making sure you're all right. Also, I brought mail." She gestured to a stack of letters on the table. "Emily Hartford wrote back. So did 2 other women who'd heard about your testimony. They all want to help."
Clara sank into a chair, overwhelmed. How did you even find this place?
I'm a postmistress, dear. I know where everyone lives. Mrs. Fletcher poured tea for Clara with steady hands. Iron Hollow is in complete chaos. The doctor's in jail, the Brennans are being investigated, and half the town is demanding answers about every diagnosis he ever made. Your testimony broke everything open. Is that good or bad? Both. It's painful, but necessary. Sometimes you have to burn down the rot before you can build something clean. The older woman pushed a letter toward Clara. Emily wants you to know she's coming back to testify. Says if you were brave enough to stand up first, she can be brave enough to stand up second. Clara picked up the letter with shaking hands and read Emily's neat handwriting. The woman she'd never met was thanking her for having the courage to speak truth, was saying that knowing the diagnosis was a lie had freed her from years of shame. Tears blurred Clara's vision. The other letters are similar, Mrs. Fletcher continued. Women from other towns who'd been diagnosed by Dr. Pritchard before he settled in Iron Hollow. Turns out he's been doing this for over a decade, moving from place to place whenever people started asking questions. How many? Clara whispered. At least 20 that we know of. Probably more. Mrs. Fletcher's expression was hard. He destroyed dozens of lives for profit, but because of you, he'll finally face justice. Clara didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired and sick and overwhelmed by the scope of what had been uncovered. One doctor, 20 women, countless families torn apart by convenient lies. And she'd almost been another silent victim. There's one more thing, Mrs. Fletcher said, pulling out a final letter. This came from your mother. Clara's hand froze halfway to the envelope. I don't want it. You should read it anyway. She watched my father sell me. She didn't say a word. Why would I care what she has to say now? Mrs. Fletcher pushed the letter closer. Because carrying that anger will eat you alive. Read it, then decide what to do with it. Clara took the letter but didn't open it. Not yet. She wasn't ready. Mrs. Fletcher stood to leave. I'll be heading back tomorrow. But I wanted you to know that what you did mattered. Iron Hollow will never be the same, and that's a good thing. She paused at the door. Take care of yourself, Clara. And that baby. The world needs more women like you. After she left, Clara and Elias sat in silence. The cabin felt different somehow, like they'd left as two people running from the past and returned as two people who'd faced it down. Are you going to read it? Elias asked, nodding at the letter from Clara's mother. Eventually, not today. She tucked the letter away in a drawer and tried not to think about it. The next few weeks passed quietly. Spring was fully upon the mountain now, snow melting into rushing streams, wildflowers pushing up through the muddy earth. Elias worked on repairing winter damage while Clara tended a small garden they'd started. Her pregnancy was becoming obvious now. Her belly swelled with each passing week, making her movements awkward and her back ache constantly. But she was healthy. The baby was growing. Everything was progressing as it should. One evening, while Elias was out checking the cattle, Clara finally opened her mother's letter. The handwriting was shaky, uncertain. Clara, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. I stood by and watched your father sell you because I was a coward. I believed the doctor because it was easier than fighting. I let shame dictate my actions instead of love. Your father is in jail now, awaiting trial. The town treats me like I'm complicit in what he did. And they're right. I was complicit. I chose his reputation over your safety. I chose comfort over courage. I don't know if you're alive or dead, but if you're reading this, I want you to know I'm sorry. I failed you as a mother. I failed you as a human being, and I will carry that shame for the rest of my life. I don't ask you to come back or to write to me or to give me another chance. I just wanted you to know that I see what I did, and I'm sorry. Bishoptum. Clara read the letter 3 times, feeling emotion she couldn't quite name. Anger was there, certainly. Hurt. Betrayal. But also something softer. Something that understood how fear could make good people do terrible things. Her mother had been weak, had chosen the easy path over the right one, had failed Clara when she needed her most. But she'd also acknowledged that failure. Clara folded the letter and put it back in the drawer. She didn't know if she'd ever respond to it. Didn't know if forgiveness was possible or even desirable. But at least her mother had told the truth. That had to count for something. The months passed. Summer came hot and bright, transforming the mountain into a riot of green. Clara's belly grew huge, making even simple tasks difficult. Elias became increasingly protective, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a cup of tea. They prepared for the birth as best they could. Elias rode down to the nearest settlement and brought back a midwife named Ruth, an older woman with capable hands and a no-nonsense attitude. She examined Clara and declared everything normal. "Baby's positioned well, you're healthy and strong. Should be a straightforward birth," Ruth said. "But I'll stay nearby just in case." Elias paid her extra to remain at a neighboring homestead, close enough to reach quickly if needed. Clara knew he was spending money they couldn't really afford, but she didn't argue. The fear in his eyes every time he looked at her belly was too raw to dismiss. Labor started on a cool September morning. Clara woke to cramping pain that came and went in waves. She lay still for a moment, timing the contractions before waking Elias. "It's time," she said quietly. He was up instantly, moving with the focused efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for this moment for months. He sent for Ruth, built up the fire, boiled water, laid out clean blankets and towels. Ruth arrived within the hour and took charge immediately. She examined Clara and nodded with satisfaction. "Early stages still? Could be hours yet. Best to walk around, keep moving." Clara tried. She paced the cabin, leaning on Elias during contractions, breathing through the pain. Hours crawled by. The contractions got stronger, closer together. The pain built until Clara thought she couldn't handle anymore, and then it built higher still. Night fell. The cabin was hot from the fire, sweat pouring down Clara's face. Ruth checked her progress and frowned slightly. "What?" Elias asked immediately, his voice tight with fear. "Baby's in a good position, but the labor's moving slow. Nothing to worry about yet, but we need to be patient." Patient. Clara wanted to scream. The pain was overwhelming now, coming in waves that left her gasping and shaking. She'd thought she understood what labor would be like, but nothing had prepared her for this intensity. Elias stayed beside her the entire time, letting her squeeze his hands until his knuckles went white, whispering encouragement that Clara barely heard through the pain. The labor continued through the night and into the next morning. 20 hours. Then 24. Clara was exhausted, her body shaking with fatigue, but the baby still hadn't come. Ruth's expression grew more serious. "The baby needs to come soon. You're getting too tired." "What do we do?" Elias asked, and Clara heard the barely controlled panic in his voice. "We push. Hard." Ruth positioned herself. "Next contraction, Clara, you push with everything you've got. Don't hold back." The next contraction hit like a freight train. Clara screamed and pushed, feeling like she was being torn in half. Again. Each push took everything she had left, and still the baby didn't come. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can," Ruth said firmly. "One more. Give me one more good push." "I can't." "Clara, look at me." Elias grabbed her face, forcing her to focus on him. "You survived being sold, survived a Montana winter, survived facing down an entire town that wanted you silent. You can survive this. Push." Clara gathered every scrap of strength left in her body and pushed. Something gave way. Ruth moved quickly, her hands sure and steady. "The head's out. One more push, Clara. Just one more." Clara pushed again, and suddenly the pressure released. A baby's cry filled the cabin, thin and furious. "It's a girl," Ruth announced, wrapping the infant in a clean blanket. "Healthy lungs on this one." She placed the baby on Clara's chest. Clara looked down at the tiny red-faced creature and felt something break open inside her. All the pain, all the fear, all the months of wondering if this moment would ever come. And here was her daughter. Real. Alive. Perfect. Elias was crying openly, his hand trembling as he touched the baby's tiny fingers. "She's beautiful." "She's ours," Clara whispered, unable to look away from her daughter's face. Ruth worked efficiently, delivering the afterbirth and cleaning up while Clara held her baby. The little girl had stopped crying and was staring up at Clara with dark, unfocused eyes. "What will you name her?" Ruth asked. Clara looked at Elias. They'd discussed names before, but now, holding their daughter, only one felt right. "Hope," Clara said. "Her name is Hope." Because that's what this baby represented. Hope that the lies didn't win. Hope that Clara could build something beautiful from the wreckage of her old life. Hope that the future could be different than the past. Hope Boone opened her tiny mouth and yawned. The weeks after Hope's birth were the hardest and most beautiful of Clara's life. The baby needed constant care, waking every few hours to feed, crying for reasons Clara couldn't always decipher. Clara was exhausted in ways she'd never experienced before, her body recovering from childbirth while trying to meet the demands of a newborn. But every time she looked at Hope's face, every time the baby's tiny hand wrapped around her finger, Clara felt a fierce joy that eclipsed the exhaustion. Elias was transformed by fatherhood. The hard, grieving man Clara had first met seemed to soften around the edges. He'd hold Hope for hours, singing old songs his own father had taught him, his scarred face gentle in ways Clara had never imagined possible. One night, watching Elias rock Hope to sleep, Clara understood something important. They'd both been broken people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances. Neither of them had been looking for love or family or redemption. They'd just been trying to survive. But survival had led to something more. It had led to healing, not complete, not perfect, but real. Elias looked up and caught her watching. "What?" "I was just thinking about how far we've come. From me buying you for 50 coins to this?" He glanced down at Hope sleeping in his arms. "Yeah, it's been a journey. Do you ever regret it, paying that money?" "Best investment I ever made," Clara smiled. "That's a terrible thing to say. It's the truth." Elias stood and carefully transferred Hope to her cradle. "I was dead before you came to that mountain, just going through the motions of being alive. You changed that. We changed each other." "Yeah, we did." Winter came again, but this time Clara wasn't afraid. The cabin was warm and well-stocked. The cattle were healthy, and the three of them were together. News from Iron Hollow arrived occasionally through Mrs. Fletcher's letters. Dr. Pritchard had been convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The Brennan family's assets had been seized to pay restitution to his victims. Clara's father was serving 5 years for human trafficking. Emily Hartford had testified, along with 6 other women. Their combined stories had been enough to destroy not just the doctor, but the entire corrupt system that had allowed him to operate for so long. Iron Hollow had a new doctor now, a woman who'd come from back east and was reportedly rigorous about ethical standards. The town was slowly rebuilding its reputation, though the scandal had driven many wealthy families to relocate. Clara read these updates with detached interest. Iron Hollow felt like something from another life, a place that had happened to someone else. Her life was here now, on this mountain, with this man and this child. One spring morning, when Hope was 6 months old and starting to sit up on her own, there was a knock at the cabin door. Elias opened it to find a young woman standing there, travel-worn and nervous. "I'm looking for Clara Boone," she said. "My name is Emily Hartford. I hope I'm not intruding, but I wanted to meet the woman who saved my life." Clara invited her in. They spent the afternoon talking, sharing their stories, finding comfort in the understanding that only someone who'd survived the same trauma could provide. Emily held Hope and cried, saying she'd never thought she'd be able to hold a baby without feeling the sting of her stolen future. "But you proved it was a lie," Emily said. "You proved we weren't broken, just lied to." "I was lucky," Clara said. "Lucky that Elias wasn't the monster everyone said he was. Lucky that my body could carry a child. Lucky in so many ways things could have gone differently. Luck had nothing to do with it. You fought. You refused to accept what they told you about yourself." Emily handed Hope back to Clara. "I'm getting married next month. To a good man who knows everything about what happened and loves me anyway. And when people ask how I found the courage to trust again, I tell them about you." After Emily left, Clara sat on the porch holding Hope, watching the sun set over the mountains. Elias came out and sat beside them. "You know what I realized?" Clara said. "For months I thought coming back to Iron Hollow was about revenge, about proving them wrong and watching them suffer, but it wasn't really about that." "No? No. It was about making sure no other girl had to go through what I did. Making sure that doctor couldn't destroy anyone else. Making sure the truth mattered more than lies." She looked at Hope. "And now our daughter will grow up in a world that's a little bit better because we refuse to stay silent." "That's a heavy legacy for such a small person," Elias said, touching Hope's soft hair. "She can handle it. She's half me and half you. She's going to be unstoppable." Hope grabbed Clara's finger and held on tight, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. Years passed. Hope grew into a fierce, curious child who loved the mountain and the cattle and the long winter nights by the fire. Clara taught her to read and write. Elias taught her to track animals and survive in the wilderness. They never lied to her about how she came into the world. When Hope was old enough to understand, they told her the truth about the corrupt doctor, about Clara being sold, about how sometimes the worst things that happen to you can lead to the best things in your life. Hope listened with wide eyes and then asked the question Clara had been waiting for. "Are you sad about what happened?" Clara thought about it carefully. "I'm sad about the pain it caused, about the women who didn't survive their shame, about the years I lost to believing I was worthless." She pulled Hope onto her lap. "But I'm not sad about where it led me, because it led to your father, and to you, and to this life we built together. So sometimes bad things can become good things? Sometimes. If you're strong enough and lucky enough and you refuse to let the bad things define you." Hope thought about this seriously. "I want to be strong like you." "You already are." More children came, a son named Jacob after Elias's first child. Then twin girls who kept everyone exhausted and laughing. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family. The ranch prospered. They never became wealthy, but they were comfortable. And they were together. Clara never reconciled with her mother, though they exchanged occasional letters. Some wounds were too deep to heal completely, but Clara made peace with it. Made peace with the fact that some relationships were too broken to fix, and that was okay. Her real family was here, the one she'd built from nothing. When Hope turned 16, she announced she wanted to be a doctor. "I want to make sure no one ever lies to women about their bodies again," she said. "I want to be the kind of doctor people can trust." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Then that's what you'll be." They found a way to send Hope to medical school back east. It wasn't easy, and it took years of saving, but they managed it. Elias sold some of his land. Clara took in sewing work. The other children pitched in however they could. Hope graduated top of her class and returned to the territories to practice medicine. She specialized in women's health and became known as a fierce advocate for her patients. She never diagnosed a woman as barren without extensive testing. Never let wealthy families pressure her into convenient lies. She was everything Clara had hoped she'd be. On Clara's 50th birthday, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, she looked around the cabin and felt something close to contentment. The mountain that had once been her prison had become her sanctuary. The man who'd bought her had become her partner. The child conceived in the aftermath of trauma had become a healer. Nothing about her journey had been fair or easy or straightforward, but it had been hers. She'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and refused to let it be the end of her story. Refused to accept the labels others had put on her. Refused to believe that being broken meant staying broken. Elias found her alone on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over the familiar peaks. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. Nothing." Clara leaned against him. "I was thinking about that first night you cut me free from the ropes. Do you remember? Every detail. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Elias was quiet for a moment. "No. I thought I'd work you through the winter, then you'd leave. Thought we'd both go back to being alone." "What changed?" "You did. You refused to be what anyone expected you to be. Refused to stay broken." He took her hand. "You taught me that surviving isn't the same as living, and that sometimes the people who've been hurt the worst are the ones with the most to give." Clara thought about Dr. Pritchard rotting in prison, about Thomas Brennan living in disgrace, about her father dying alone and unmourned. She'd won. Not because they'd been punished, though they had been, but because she'd built a life they couldn't touch, because she'd proven that their lies didn't define her, because she'd taken everything they'd tried to destroy and made it stronger. The town of Iron Hollow had called her barren, worthless, cursed, but the mountain had given her everything that mattered, a partner who saw her worth when no one else would, children who carried her strength forward into the world, a purpose bigger than revenge, and most importantly, proof that sometimes the worst betrayal of your life can become the doorway to your freedom. Clara Boone died at 73, surrounded by 3 generations of family who loved her fiercely. Her obituary in the Iron Hollow newspaper was simple. "Clara Boone, beloved mother and grandmother, passed peacefully. She will be remembered for her courage in exposing corruption and her dedication to her family."
But the women who'd known her story, who'd been saved by her testimony, who'd found the courage to speak their own truths because she'd spoken hers first, they remembered something more. They remembered a woman who'd been sold like livestock and returned like thunder. They remembered someone who'd turned shame into power and pain into purpose. They remembered that Clara Boone had been called worthless and had proven that worth isn't something anyone can take from you. It's something you carry inside yourself, unbreakable and eternal, waiting to be recognized. And sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to believe the lies for the whole house of cards to come crashing down.